What is up, deep thinkers, and welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the best ideas from the world of books. I'm your host, James, and today we are jumping into the deep, deep end. We're tackling Chapter 1 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. The chapter is called Turtles All the Way Down, which is already amazing. And to help me make sense of it all, I've got the liveliest mind I know, Sarah, and our very own witty scientist, Ethan. Welcome, guys. You ready to have your sense of self completely dismantled?
Oh, I was born ready, James. This chapter, wow. It's like a philosophical shot of espresso. It starts with this great story about the psychologist William James giving a lecture.
Right, the turtle story. Lay it on us.
Okay, so after the lecture, an old woman tells him he's got it all wrong. The world, she says, is resting on the back of a giant turtle. James, being a good sport, asks, well, what is that turtle standing on? And she just replies, on the back of another turtle. He pushes her again, and she says, triumphantly, it's no use, Professor James. It's turtles all the way down.
Ha! I love that. So what's the takeaway? We all live on a cosmic reptile?
Basically, yes, except the turtles are prior causes. Sapolsky's whole point is that we laugh at that story, but it's actually much more ridiculous to think that somewhere down the stack, there's a turtle just floating in the air. That floating turtle is free will, a choice that comes from nothing. He says, no. Everything, every single action is just another turtle standing on a previous turtle.
It's the sheer intellectual confidence that I admire. He's not saying free will is a bit shaky. He's saying the idea of a causeless cause is fundamentally nonsensical. The universe, according to him, doesn't do floating turtles. It does turtles all the way down. It's an infinite chain of causality, and our actions are just the last link.
Okay, so my decision to listen to that Guilty Pleasure 90s pop playlist this morning, that wasn't a spontaneous moment of joy? Walk me through it, Sapolsky style. Where did that choice come from?
Let's follow the turtles. So in the second before you hit play, specific neurons fired in your brain. Why those neurons? Well, maybe in the minutes before, you saw something that reminded you of high school. That memory was primed by your hormone levels. Maybe you were feeling a bit nostalgic. That feeling was shaped by what you ate for breakfast, which was shaped by your culture, which was shaped by centuries of agriculture.
And we haven't even gotten to the big stuff. He takes it all the way back. Your adolescent brain development, your childhood experiences, the hormonal soup you marinated in as a fetus, the specific genes you inherited from your parents, and then the evolutionary pressures that shaped those genes over millennia. Your 90s pop moment, James, was an event with an unbroken causal history stretching back to the dawn of time.
Good Lord. So I was determined to listen to Aqua's Barbie Girl. That's a lot to take in. But the implications of this are the really wild part, right? If it's all determined, what happens to, everything?
Exactly. That's where he goes next. And it's a huge leap. He says if there's no free will, then there's no such thing as blame. Punishment as retribution, as in someone deserving to suffer, is incoherent. It makes as much sense as hating a tornado for destroying your house.
And, crucially, the flip side is also true. No one deserves praise either, or is entitled to anything. He says you can praise someone to encourage the behavior, sure, but the idea that they earned it in some ultimate cosmic sense is an illusion. Your achievements are just the product of your cumulative biological and environmental luck.
That feels so counterintuitive. It's like our brains are built to reject that idea. I mean, my entire sense of self is based on the idea that I am making choices and I am responsible for them.
And he agrees. He says most people, from philosophers to preschoolers, believe in free will. He even admits that he, himself, can't really live like there's no free will, even though he's certain it doesn't exist. He still gets angry. He still feels pride. It's a total paradox.
We are deterministic biological machines that have evolved to create a compelling, user-friendly illusion of being in the driver's seat, which is just a fascinating, if unsettling, thought.
Speaking of creating things, this conversation about how we're constructed, how our paths are shaped, actually makes me think of our sponsor. This episode of Penplexity is brought to you by Mages Institute in Singapore.
Oh, that's a cool connection.
Right? Mages is a leading school for creative media, offering programs in things like game design, game art, and concept art. It's all about providing hands-on training to help people build amazing careers in these fields. And as we're discussing how everything is determined, it's interesting to think about creativity itself. Is an artist's vision their own, or is it the end product of their unique turtles? Either way, if you have a passion for creating these incredible worlds, you need the skills to bring them to life.
Absolutely. It's all about building that skill stack. If you feel that pull towards creative media, Mages sounds like the perfect place to forge that path. You should definitely check them out.
Agreed. Whether your desire to be a game designer is free or determined, the practical steps are the same. Get the training. Mages Institute sounds like a fantastic place to do that. Their website is mages.edu.sg.
That's mages.edu.sg. Our huge thanks to Mages Institute for their support. Okay, so we were talking about how we're all just living out a script. But Sapolsky points out that not everyone agrees. He lays out the different philosophical camps.
Yeah, the 4 flavors. So Sapolsky is a hard incompatibilist. He thinks determinism and free will are totally incompatible, and since determinism is real, free will is out. The main group he argues against are the, quote, compatibilists. They make up, like, 90% of philosophers, and they try to argue that even in a fully deterministic world, we can still have free will. He thinks they're essentially just redefining free will into something less free.
And he has that great thought experiment to filter out who's worth arguing with. The story of Phineas Gage, the railroad worker who had a metal rod shoot through his frontal cortex and completely changed his personality. If you hear that and just shrug and say, whatever, free will is still real, Sapolsky's not interested. He wants to debate the people who have genuinely wrestled with the biology and still think there's a case to be made.
I like that. He's setting the ground rules for an honest debate. All right, speaking of debate, let's take a few questions from our listeners. First up is Leo from Chicago. Leo asks, "This is all so bleak. If I'm not responsible for my failures, I'm also not responsible for my successes. Where's the motivation? How do you even get out of bed in the morning?" Ethan, you want to take that?
That is the question, isn't it? The emotional core of the problem. I think Sapolsky would argue that we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the point isn't motivation based on future reward or deservedness. Maybe the motivation is just the experience itself. The love you feel for your family isn't less meaningful because it's a storm of neurochemicals. It's still love. He says love is made of the, quote, same building blocks that constitute wildebeest or asteroids. That doesn't make love cheap. It makes the universe sacred.
Wow. Okay. Next question is from Priya in Mumbai. She writes, "I feel like I make choices. The feeling is undeniable. I chose to listen to this podcast over another one. It didn't feel determined. It felt free. What's that about? Sarah?"
That's a great point, and he addresses it. That feeling of making a choice is absolutely real. It's a genuine neurological event. But the feeling isn't proof of the process. It's like watching a magician. The feeling of awe is real, but it's not proof that magic exists. It just means you didn't see the hidden mechanism. Our conscious mind is only aware of the final step in a long, long chain of unconscious processes. So it takes credit for the final result, and that credit-taking feels like free will.
It's a user interface for a very complex machine. Got it. Last question from Aisha in London. The graduation ceremony example. The graduate and the garbage collector. Isn't it a bit too simple to say they just swap places? What about human spirit or resilience, that special spark?
Ah, the special spark. That right there is the floating turtle. Sapolsky's entire argument is that the spark is also a product of the turtles. Any resilience or grit that one person has and another doesn't. That too is a result of their unique combination of genes and environment. If you truly swapped every single factor between the graduate and the garbage collector, every gene, every epigenetic change in the womb, every meal, every word spoken to them, every single thing, then yes, he argues, their outcomes would be swapped. Because there is nothing else. That spark is what we call it, when we can't see the underlying biological luck.
Man, My head is spinning. This is one of those ideas that could change how you see, well, everything. Sarah, before we wrap up, can you distill this down for us? What are the key takeaways from Chapter 1?
Of course. Okay, takeaway 1. The core idea is turtles all the way down. Every action is caused by a prior action, and looking for a first uncaused choice is a fool's errand. 2. This causal chain is unbreakable, stretching from the neurons firing in your brain right now all the way back through your life, your genes, your culture, and evolution. 3. The logical conclusion is that moral responsibility, in the sense of people deserving blame or praise, is an illusion. 4. And finally, even the author admits this is a really hard pill to swallow, and most of us are wired to believe in free will, but he argues we have to grapple with this to become more compassionate.
Incredible. A perfect summary of a truly perplexing chapter. Thank you both so much. So, to our listeners, what should Penplexity get perplexed by next? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials at Penplexity or on our website, penplexity.com. Until next time, keep those pages turning and keep questioning. Welcome to another episode of Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the best ideas from the world of books. I'm your host, James, and today we are diving headfirst into a real mind bender. We're tackling Chapter 2 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. The chapter is called The Final 3 Minutes of a Movie, and it kicks off with this intense scene. Imagine a murder at an airfield. A cop stands by and does nothing. Other cops show up, take the body, but leave the shooter. It's baffling, right? Sapolsky's point is, that's how we look at human behavior. We only watch the final, confusing 3 minutes without any of the context that came before. And today, we're going to watch the whole movie. To help me do that, I have my amazing guests, the lively and brilliant Sarah, and the ever-insightful, ever-witty Ethan. Welcome back.
Hey, James. So excited for this one. That movie analogy is it's perfect. We are obsessed with the quote-to-crime scene of a decision, but we completely ignore the entire plot that led up to it.
Hello. And the chief suspect in this particular crime scene, the one that's dominated the investigation for 40 years, is a study Sapolsky calls infamous, the Libet experiment.
Infamous. I love it. Sounds like there's some scientific drama. Sarah, lay it on us. What did this Libet guy do that caused such a stir?
Okay, so picture this. It's the early 80s. Benjamin Libet brings you into his lab. He sticks a bunch of electrodes on your head for an EEG, puts this special super fast clock in front of you, and gives you a very simple task. Push this button whenever you want. Just whenever you feel the urge. And the moment you are first aware of your decision to push it, note the time on the clock.
That sounds incredibly simple. And maybe a little bit boring, if I'm being honest.
Totally. But the results were anything but boring. So people would say, okay, I decided to push it now. And that feeling of choice happened about 0.2 of a second before their finger actually moved. But the EEG, the brain scan, picked up a little spike of activity, a readiness potential, about 0.3 of a second before they thought they decided. Your brain had already started the process of pushing the button before you even knew you were going to.
And boom. That's the shot heard round the neurophilosophy world. Suddenly, our precious conscious choice starts to look like a post hoc illusion. It's like a press release your brain's PR department sends you long after the real decision was made in a back room.
Hold on. So my brain is making decisions behind my back and then just sending me a memo about it later? That's deeply unsettling.
It is. And it gets even more unsettling. Decades later, scientists like John Dylan Haynes redid the experiment with much fancier tech, like fMRI scanners. And they found they could predict which button a person would press, up to 10 seconds before the person was consciously aware of their own choice.
And then another scientist, Itzhak Fried, did it with electrodes placed directly into patients' brains, monitoring individual neurons. And guess what? Same spooky punchline. 3 different methods, all pointing to the idea that the neurobiological die has been cast long before we feel like we've even picked it up to roll it.
Wow. Okay. So, is that it? Case closed? Free will is a myth? Should we just pack it up and go home?
Not so fast. This is where, as Sapolsky colorfully puts it, the monumental shitstorm really gets going. The critics, or compatibilists, came out swinging. And their first big punch was, really? You're proclaiming the death of free will based on spontaneous finger wiggles?
Laughs. It's a really good point. They argue there's a huge difference between, say, picking which button to press, which is meaningless, and truly choosing something with consequence, like deciding which of two charities gets a $1,000 donation.
Precisely. And one super elegant study did just that. When the choice was meaningful, donating real money, that readiness potential just vanished. It only showed up for the boring, arbitrary choice. The takeaway from critics was, basically, this whole Libet world tells us nothing about the kind of free will that's actually worth wanting.
So it's just a lab trick? But I thought you said they did it with bungee jumpers. Jumping off a bridge is not a boring, meaningless choice. At least I hope not.
They did, and they found the readiness potential there too. But the argument remains that it's still a kind of artificial when-to-go decision. The other, and I think more powerful, criticism that gives people hope is the issue of accuracy.
Yes, that shocking 10-second prediction from the fMRI study, the one that makes all the headlines, it was only about 60% accurate. Barely better than a coin flip. As one philosopher, Alfred Meillet, puts it, a quote, 60% accuracy rate doesn't seem to be much of a threat to free will.
Even the super-invasive single neuron recordings only got up to about 80% accuracy, which is good, but it's not 100%. It's not proof. It's not the nail in free will's coffin that people claim it is.
So the brain isn't issuing an inescapable order. It's more like a strong suggestion, a nudge.
That's one way to frame it. And that leads directly to this other concept that compatibilists love, free won't. The idea is, okay, maybe we can't freely will an action to begin, but maybe we have the power to veto it, to slam on the brakes before it happens.
The emergency brake of consciousness. It's an appealing two-stage model. Your brain, the unconscious machine, generates possibilities, urges, and then you, the conscious self, the CEO, gets to look at the proposal and give it a green light or a red light. Yes, proceed with grabbing that cookie, or no, abort, we're on a diet.
It is very appealing. But Sapolsky argues it's just as much of an illusion. The neurobiology of inhibiting an action isn't magically different from the neurobiology of activating one. It's just more neurons firing or not firing in a causal chain. There's no special autonomous free won't neuron that exists outside of that biological reality, any more than there's a free will one.
Okay, my head is officially spinning with readiness potentials and veto power and urges versus decisions. This all feels so microscopic. We're talking about fractions of a second before I push a button.
And that right there is the entire point of this chapter. That's why the title is The Final 3 Minutes of a Movie. All this bickering about Libet, all this focus on what happens in the few seconds before an act, it's missing 99% of the story. The real devastating question isn't when you formed the intent or if you can veto it. It's where did that intent come from in the first place?
Exactly. Why did you even have the impulse to choose the left button over the right? Why did you have the kind of brain that would generate an urge to be generous while someone else's brain generates a selfish one? Why were you the person who would even sign up for a bungee jumping experiment while I'd be at home, alphabetizing my bookshelf? That isn't decided in the milliseconds before the act.
Not at all. It was decided by your genes, your hormones, your childhood, the culture you were raised in, whether you had a stressful morning, everything that came before that moment. Obsessing over the readiness potential is like trying to understand the entire movie Casablanca by only watching the final foggy airfield scene. You see the dramatic action, but you have absolutely no clue why Humphrey Bogart made that heartbreaking choice.
Wow, okay, that reframes everything. So the entire 40-year debate about these experiments is basically a distraction?
Sapolsky would say it's a fascinating, intellectually rigorous, and ultimately irrelevant distraction. It's kept scientists busy for decades, but it's prevented us from asking the much bigger, much more important question about where our choices actually originate.
Speaking of originating and creating, that's a perfect, if slightly clunky, transition to our sponsor. We're all about diving deep into complex worlds here, and if you've ever wanted to create those worlds yourself, you need to know about Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a top-tier school for creative media education. They offer industry-focused programs in things like game design, game art, concept art, basically all the cool stuff that goes into building the virtual worlds we love to get lost in. They provide hands-on training from expert instructors and have amazing industry connections to help you get a career started or to level up your skills. If that sounds like you, visit their website at mages.edu.sg.
Absolutely. If you're passionate about those fields, you should definitely check them out. Building worlds is no small feat.
Indeed. Go learn how to design the choices, even if the players don't have the free will to make them. mages.edu.sg.
All right, we're back, and it's time to take some questions from our listeners. Our first one comes from Alex in Ohio, who asks, if the Libet studies are so flawed or irrelevant, why do free will skeptics like Sapolsky still spend so much time talking about them? Sarah?
That's a great question, Alex. It's because you can't ignore it. Libet is Mount Everest in this landscape. It's the most famous, most cited, most argued over study in the entire neurobiology of free will. So Sapolsky has to climb it and explain it, just to show everyone why he thinks the real view is from a different mountain altogether. He's showing his work and explaining why he thinks this whole line of inquiry, while important, is ultimately a dead end for answering the big question.
Makes sense. You have to engage with the main argument to show why it's wrong. Okay, next question is from Maya in London. She says, it seems like a lot of the debate comes down to the difference between an urge and a decision. Is this just arguing about words? Ethan, what do you think?
Maya, you've hit on the philosopher's bread and butter. It might seem like just semantics, but it's everything. If that readiness potential is just an urge, a bubble of possibility floating up from the unconscious, then there's still room for a conscious self to come in and pop it or let it float on. But if it's a decision that's already been made, well, that's a much bigger problem for free will. So yes, it's arguing over words, but they are the words upon which entire worldviews are built.
Deep. Okay, one last question. This is from Ben in Toronto. Does Sapolsky think we should just get rid of the idea of intent in the legal system?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question. Based on this chapter, I'd say no, not that we should get rid of it, but that we should see how myopic it is to only focus on it. A court asks, did the defendant intend to pull the trigger? Sapolsky is pushing us to ask, what happened in the minutes, days, years, and millennia before that moment that created a person for whom that intent was possible, or even likely? It's not about ignoring intent, but about seeing it as the very last, tiny step in a lifelong process.
That is a powerful thought to end on. So, before we wrap up, I need a final key takeaway from one of you. Ethan, distill this whole chapter down for us.
I think the key takeaway is that we're looking for free will under the wrong microscope. The debate over readiness potentials and what happens in the milliseconds before a finger twitch is a fascinating sideshow. The main event, the crucial question Sapolsky forces us to confront is this. If you can't choose what you intend to intend, can you really be free? It shifts the focus from the final 3 minutes of the movie to the entire script that came before.
From the final 3 minutes to the entire script. I love that. And that is all the time we have for today, folks. Thank you to Sarah and Ethan for another fantastic discussion. What should Penplexity get tangled up in next? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials at Penplexity and on our website at penplexity.com. Until next time, keep reading and keep questioning. Hello and welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the ink of big ideas. I'm your host, James, and as always, I am joined by the two people who make my brain feel both bigger and smaller at the same time. We have the wonderfully sharp and relatable Sarah.
Hello, hello. Happy to be here, ready to get tangled.
And the man who can find the universe in a grain of sand, our resident witty scientist, Ethan.
A grain of sand is far too complex. I prefer to start with a single quark. Hello, everyone.
Right, okay, well today we're diving into another chapter of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. This is Chapter 3, titled, Where Does Intent Come From? And oh boy, this chapter, it basically throws out the entire debate we thought we were having about free will.
It really does. The last chapter was all about those Libet experiments, you know? The ones trying to pinpoint the exact millisecond you decide to push a button. Sapolsky just walks in and says, nope, wrong question. Completely irrelevant.
Exactly. He's not asking when you decided to push the button. He's asking, why? Why that button and not the other? Why did you form that specific intention in the first place? And that, my friends, is where things get complicated.
He calls it a, quote, responsibility-destroying regress. The argument is that the why doesn't begin a few seconds before your choice. It's an unbroken chain of causality stretching back through your entire life, your genetics, your culture, all the way back to the primordial soup, essentially. Turtles all the way down.
Right! And that's the core of the chapter. He breaks it down layer by layer, going backward in time. It starts with the seconds and minutes before you make a decision. And it's wild how much our environment influences us without us even realizing it.
Okay, hit me with an example. What's happening in the seconds before I decide, say, what to have for lunch?
Well, maybe not lunch, but how about your moral judgments? There's this famous study he mentions where they put people in a room that either smelled neutral or disgusting, and they asked them their opinions on social issues.
Oh, I feel like I know where this is going.
The people in the stinky room suddenly became more judgmental, specifically towards gay men. Their reported warmth for them decreased, but not for other groups. It's because our brain has this region, the insula, that handles both physical disgust, like a bad smell or taste, and moral disgust. Evolution just kind of tacked on the moral part to the old, pre-existing, don't eat rotten food part.
It's a fantastic example of evolutionary tinkering. There wasn't time to evolve a brand new brain region for a complex human idea like moral disgust. So evolution just repurposed the insula. Your brain literally can't tell the difference between a foul odor and a behavior you find morally foul. The signal is just disgust. Yetch.
So if someone cuts me off in traffic and I happen to be driving past a garbage dump, I'm going to be even angrier at them?
The data would suggest a higher probability of that, yes. The disgust signal from the dump primes the insula, which then pokes the amygdala, your brain's fear and aggression center, and suddenly that driver isn't just rude, they're morally repugnant.
And it's not just smells, it's tactile stuff too. They had people stick their hands in fake vomit.
Nope. No hard pass on that study.
Huh! Well, those people became way harsher in their judgments about purity violations, like someone doing something gross. Or the Macbeth effect. After you lie or do something unethical, you're more likely to want to wash your hands or use hand sanitizer. You literally feel morally dirty.
This is so weird, but okay, these are subtle nudges. This doesn't completely destroy free will, does it?
Sapolsky would say this is just the first turtle, the first layer. It's just to show that even in the immediate moment of choice, the world is pushing on your scales in ways you're not conscious of. Now pull back to minutes, hours, days before.
Hormones! Let's talk about hormones. Everyone thinks testosterone just equals aggression, right? Punching walls and yelling.
Yeah, pretty much. High T, more grr.
But it's not that simple. Sapolsky clarifies that testosterone doesn't create aggression. It amplifies pre-existing aggressive tendencies. If you're already prone to being aggressive, it just lowers the threshold. It makes you more likely to interpret a neutral face as threatening. It makes you overconfident and less empathetic.
And your testosterone level isn't something you choose. It fluctuates based on time of day, whether you've just exercised, your genetics, what you experienced as a fetus, all things totally out of your control. Then you have the other side of the coin, oxytocin.
Ah, the cuddle hormone. The love drug. Makes everyone nice and fuzzy.
Nope. Another myth busted. Oxytocin isn't a make everyone nice hormone. It's a make us nicer to our group hormone. It increases trust and generosity with your in-group, your us, but for an out-group, a them, it can actually increase preemptive aggression and bias.
It enhances the biological boundary between us and them. It's profoundly social, but in a tribal way. It doesn't make you love humanity. It makes you love your humanity. And who counts as us versus them is defined by, well, the next turtles down the stack, your culture, your childhood.
This is a lot. So my brain chemistry is being tweaked by smells, by hormones that make me tribal, and this is all before we even get to the big stuff like how I was raised?
Exactly. And that's the next layer back. Weeks, years, and especially adolescence. This is all about neuroplasticity, the fact that your brain is physically changing based on your experiences. Trauma, for instance, can literally enlarge your amygdala, making you more anxious and fearful for years to come.
Okay, that makes a grim sort of sense. But what about the adolescence part? Why is that so important?
Because of the frontal cortex. It's the part of your brain responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, regulating emotions, basically, being a grown-up.
Which, as a teenager, you are famously bad at.
Precisely. And that's because the frontal cortex is the last part of the brain to fully mature. It's not done cooking until you're in your mid-20s. This means your entire adolescence is a massive construction project happening in the most important part of your brain for decision-making. And what are the building materials? Your experiences. Love, trauma, rejection, social pressures, the culture you're in, all of it.
Sapolsky makes this amazing point that this delay was actively selected for by evolution. The brain frees the frontal cortex from genetic control as much as possible, so it can be shaped by experience. Genes can't tell you what's the right thing in a complex human society. You have to learn it, the long, hard, awkward teenage way.
Wow. So who you are as an adult is massively shaped by the messy construction site that was your teenage brain. You know, speaking of shaping minds and learning through experience, this feels like a perfect moment to thank our sponsor. This episode of Penplexity is brought to you by the Mages Institute in Singapore.
Oh, Mages is fantastic.
It really is. Mages is a leading institution for creative media education, offering these incredible diploma and certificate programs in things like game design, game art, concept art, all the cool stuff. They're all about hands-on, practical training that prepares you for a real career. It's funny, we're talking about how environment and experience build our frontal cortex. In a way, Magus does that for your creative brain, giving you the structure and skills to turn your passion into a profession.
That's a great way to put it. If you're passionate about those industries and want a real, career-focused education to get your foot in the door, you should absolutely check them out.
Agreed. They provide the enriching environment Sapolsky talks about, but for honing professional skills. Their website is mages.edu.sg. That's mages.edu.s-g. Go have a look.
All right, so we've covered the immediate environment, hormones, and adolescence. But the rabbit hole goes deeper.
Oh yeah, we're going back to childhood. This is where he brings in the ACE score, or Adverse Childhood Experience Score. It's a checklist of traumatic events, and the results are staggering. For every point you get on that ACE score, your likelihood of adult antisocial behavior, impulse control problems, depression, it goes up by about 35%.
35% per point? That's huge. And he says luck doesn't even out over time. It amplifies.
Correct. Bad luck is a cascade. An unlucky genetic predisposition makes you more sensitive to an unlucky adverse childhood. That childhood shapes your brain to be less resilient and makes you less able to take advantage of the few lucky opportunities that might come your way later. It's a feedback loop. There is no magical balancing of the scales.
And this chain goes back further, to the womb. Maternal stress floods the fetal brain with glucocorticoids, increasing the risk for anxiety and depression in adulthood. Then back to the moment of conception, your genes. You don't choose them. And they aren't destiny, but they interact with that childhood you didn't choose to produce different outcomes.
So a gene for, say, risk-taking could lead to you becoming a startup founder or a bank robber, depending entirely on the environment you grew up in.
Exactly. A gene only specifies a protein. What that protein does is entirely context-dependent. And the final turtle, or maybe the turtle that all the other turtles are standing on, is culture.
I loved the rice versus wheat farming example. For millennia, rice farming in southern China required massive collective labor, building collectivist cultures. Wheat farming in the north was more individualistic. And today, even their university student grandchildren show these traits. They literally tested it by putting chairs in the way in a Starbucks. The rice people walked around them. The wheat people moved them.
That's unbelievable. So centuries of farming practices are influencing whether I move a chair in a coffee shop today? It all feels so inescapable. A seamless stream of cause and effect with no gap. No place for a you that's separate from all of it to make a free choice.
That is precisely Sapolsky's point, and it's why he says the bar for proving free will isn't, quote, absurdly high. It's the only bar there is. To have free will, you'd have to show that a neuron fired for no reason, that its action was completely uninfluenced by the hormone levels that morning, the experiences from your childhood, the genes you inherited, the culture of your ancestors, everything. And science can find no evidence of such a ghost in the machine.
Mind-blowing stuff. Okay, let's take a few questions from our listeners. First one is from Leo in Toronto. He asks, if our intentions aren't our own, does that mean we're just puppets? What's the point of trying to be a good person? Ethan?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think Sapolsky would argue that even if we are biological puppets, we are puppets that feel like we're pulling our own strings. This subjective experience of choice is undeniable. The point of trying to be a good person isn't to earn some cosmic free will credit, but because creating a better, safer, more compassionate world is a desirable outcome. We don't stop trying to fix a car just because we understand how the engine works. We use that knowledge to make it run better.
Great answer. Okay, next question from Maria in London. You mentioned gut bacteria. Are you seriously telling me my lunch choice today could affect my moral decisions next week? Sarah?
Ha! Yes, and isn't that just bonkers? But it's not like you eat a yogurt and suddenly decide to donate to charity. It's one of 1,000 tiny, subtle influences. The makeup of your gut microbiome can influence your mood, your anxiety levels, and those things, in turn, can subtly shade your decisions. It's just another drop in the giant biological ocean that is you.
Another drop in the ocean. I like that. Final question from David in California. This all sounds pretty depressing. Is there any good news in this chapter?
I think there's incredible good news here. If we accept that people are the product of this long, unbroken chain of factors they didn't control, it becomes so much harder to hate. It pushes us toward compassion and understanding instead of blame and retribution. It means we should focus on fixing the causes of negative behavior, like poverty and childhood trauma, instead of just punishing the symptoms. To me, that's not depressing, it's profoundly hopeful.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. So as we wrap up, Ethan, could you give us the one key takeaway from this chapter?
The key takeaway is that who you are and what you intend to do in any given moment is the product of a seamless, uninterrupted causal chain of biology and environment over which you had no control. It's turtles all the way down. The luck of your genes, your womb, your childhood, your culture, it all constitutes who you become. There is no gap in that story for a magical, uncaused you to pop in and take credit.
Turtles all the way down. Well, my brain is officially perplexed. Thank you, Sarah and Ethan, for another incredible conversation.
Anytime, James.
My pleasure.
So what do you all think we should tackle next? Let us know. Follow us on social media at Penplexity and visit our website at penplexity.com to join the conversation. Until next time, keep questioning. Welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the brilliant and sometimes baffling world of books. I'm your host, James, and with me, as always, are the dynamic duo of Deep Dives. We have the wonderfully fun and relatable Sarah.
Hey everyone! So excited to be here.
And the man who makes neurons sound like a stand-up routine, the witty scientist himself, Ethan.
A pleasure to be processing stimuli with you all again.
All right, so today we are sinking our teeth into Chapter 4 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. This chapter is called Willing Willpower, The Myth of Grit. And oh boy, this one feels personal for a lot of people, I think.
Oh, absolutely. It's the one that goes right for the jugular of every self-help book ever written. The core idea is this dualism we all live with. Sapolsky puts up this chart, right? On one side, you have the biological stuff we're given. You're tall, you have a gift for music, you have a proclivity for alcoholism. We mostly accept we didn't choose that.
Right, I didn't choose to be this devastatingly handsome. It was a burden I was born with.
Chuckles. The data on that is still pending, James.
Exactly. But then there's the other side of the chart. What you do with it. Do you have grit? Do you resist temptation? Do you fight through the pain? And we see that part. That's where we think, ah, there it is. That's me. That's my free will. Sapolsky's entire point is, nope, that's a myth. The right side of the chart is just as biological and determined as the left.
He really sets the stage for it with this concept he calls wasness. This idea, even from serious philosophers like Daniel Dennett, that, okay, maybe you don't have free will in this exact moment, but you had it in the past. You grew into your autonomy. You had time to shape yourself into the kind of person who wouldn't, say, keep shooting an assailant 11 seconds after you've already incapacitated them.
Yeah, that example was brutal. The guy with the horrific life story. Fetal alcohol syndrome, abuse, homelessness, trauma. The law says 11 seconds is time to premeditate. But Sapolsky argues for that guy, with that brain, forged by that history. 11 seconds is a joke.
It's a complete joke, because the argument against him is that somewhere, back in his past, he could have chosen to become a different person. But Sapolsky's mantra is, was once now. The person you were 10 years ago was just as much a product of biology and environment as you are right now. You can't just find a crack in time and shove free will in there.
It's turtles all the way down, as the saying goes. There's no uncaused cause. And Sapolsky's favorite example of this false dichotomy is the Jerry Sandusky case. The quote from the psychologist James Cantor is just perfect. One cannot choose to not be a pedophile, but one can choose to not be a child molester. It sounds so reasonable, so neat. But Sapolsky says that choice to not act is just as much a product of nuts and bolts biology as the urge itself.
Okay, so if it's not some mystical willpower or gumption, what is it? What's doing the work?
It's the PFC, the prefrontal cortex. It's the brain's CEO, the adult in the room. It's the part that's all about long-term planning, impulse control. Basically, doing the right thing when it's the harder thing to do. It's the part of your brain that tells you not to eat the entire cake, or to study for the exam instead of binging that new show.
And it's a fascinating piece of hardware. It's the newest part of the brain, evolutionarily speaking, and the last to fully mature, not until your mid-20s. Which is crucial, because it means a quarter century of your life is actively shaping its final form. It's not a single thing, either. He breaks it down into subregions, like the DLPFC and the VMPFC.
The DL what now?
Think of it like this. The DLPFC is the cold, rational, utilitarian part. It's the Spock of your brain. If I sacrifice this one person, I can save 5. Logically, I should do it. But the VMPFC is the one that gets all the emotional intel, the gut feelings. It's the one that screams, "But that's my mom! I can't sacrifice my mom."
And the key finding, which is so profound, is that you need both. People with damage to the rational DLPFC become impulsive, but people with damage to the emotional VMPFC, they become these heartless, detached beings. They can't make decisions because they have no gut feeling to guide them. They know something is wrong, but they don't feel that it's wrong. So this idea of a war between pure reason and messy emotion is wrong. They're intertwined. You need emotion to make good, rational decisions.
So the grit is really just how well-functioning and well-fueled your PFC is at any given moment.
Exactly. And this is where it gets wild. Sapolsky just dismantles the idea that its functioning is up to you. He starts with seconds to hours before a decision. Are you hungry? Tired? Stressed? In pain? All of that drains the energy from your PFC.
The judge study, I have to bring up the judge study. It's mind-blowing. Judges granting parole had a 65% chance of saying yes right after a meal, and it dropped to near 0% just before their next meal. My future could depend on a sandwich.
And it's not a metaphor. Your PFC literally runs on glucose. When cognitive load is high or energy is low, it defaults to the easiest, most reflexive path. And for a judge, denying parole is easier. It requires less empathy, less cognitive work, less walking in the prisoner's shoes. That's not a moral failing. It's a biological resource problem.
And he just keeps zooming out. Hours to days before? That's your hormones. Testosterone, estrogen, stress hormones, all changing how your PFC neurons fire. Days to years? That's neuroplasticity. Chronic stress shrinks it. Exercise strengthens it. Then you get to adolescence.
Oh boy, adolescence.
The PFC is a construction site, but the dopamine system, the reward-seeking part, is a full-blown rave. It's why teens are, well, teens. And your experiences then, good or bad, literally build the adult PFC you'll have for the rest of your life.
Then he goes to childhood, and it's almost heartbreaking. Socioeconomic status, childhood abuse, the ACE scores. You can see the physical differences in the PFC of a 4-week-old baby based on the family's income. The 30 million word gap by age 3. These are profound environmental factors, carving out the very machinery we later call character.
Wow, it really reframes everything. You know, speaking of being shaped by your environment and learning skills to build a better future, this feels like a really good moment to talk about our wonderful sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a leading institution for creative media education, offering industry-focused diploma and professional certificate programs in areas like game design, game art, concept art, and more. They're committed to providing students with hands-on training, expert instructors, and strong industry connections to prepare them for successful careers in these exciting fields. We're hoping to reach listeners who are passionate about these industries and looking for a practical, career-oriented education to help them break in or advance their skills. Their website is mages.edu.sg, and we'd love for you to visit and learn more.
You know, that's such a perfect fit for this chapter. Sapolsky's point is, you can't just will yourself to have more willpower. But what you can do is put yourself in an environment that shapes your brain for the better. If you want to be a game designer, you need that structure, that expert guidance. That's what Mages provides.
Exactly. You're creating new neural pathways, building skills from the ground up. Mages is a perfect example of the kind of enriched environment Sapolsky talks about that has real, tangible effects on your brain and your future. So if that's your passion, absolutely go check them out at mages.edu.sg.
All right, let's dive back in. We have a few questions from our listeners. The first one is from Leo in Chicago. He asks, so if willpower isn't real, should I just give up on my diet and eat cake all day? What's the point of trying?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a total misunderstanding of the point. Sapolsky isn't saying don't try. He's saying we need to change how we try. If your willpower fails, the answer isn't to beat yourself up for being morally weak. The answer is to look for the real causes. Are you too stressed? Are you not getting enough sleep? Is your kitchen full of junk food? It's about changing the environment and the inputs, not demanding more from a non-existent ghost in the machine.
That makes so much sense. Okay, next question is from Priya in London. You mentioned the guy who shot the assailant. The law says 11 seconds is enough time to premeditate. Is Sapolsky saying the legal system is fundamentally wrong?
In a word, yes. He's saying our entire system of blame and punishment is built on a folk psychology that science has left in the dust. The law's reasonable person standard is a fiction that ignores individual biology. For the man in that story, with his specific history of trauma, brain injuries, and PTSD, his brain's threat response system would be on a hair trigger. For him, 11 seconds is not the same as it is for a judge sitting in a comfortable chair. The context of his biology changes everything.
So we're judging everyone by a standard that might be biologically impossible for some to meet. Yikes. Okay, one last question from Marcus in Toronto. He says, I'm still stuck on the Jerry Sandusky example. It just feels wrong to say he couldn't choose not to be a monster. Where does responsibility go?
This is the hardest pill to swallow. It feels viscerally wrong because our intuition for blame is so strong. But Sapolsky's point is that the choice to not act is governed by the PFC, and the functioning of that PFC is the end result of a lifetime of factors he didn't control. So from a purely mechanical, biological view, no, he couldn't have done otherwise. Responsibility, in the sense of moral blame, is what Sapolsky argues we should get rid of. He's not saying let dangerous people roam free. He's for quarantining them to protect society. But it would be like quarantining someone with a deadly virus, not punishing them for having a moral failing they didn't choose.
Wow, that is a heavy concept to wrap your head around. It changes everything, Ethan, can you try to boil this down for us? What's the one key takeaway from this chapter on the myth of grit?
The single most important takeaway is that the you who has grit or willpower is not separate from your biology. That feeling of, I am choosing to resist this cookie, is itself a biological process produced by your PFC. And the strength of that PFC, its ability to do the harder thing, is the product of a seamless, unbroken chain of causality. Your genes, your childhood, your hormone levels, how much sleep you got last night, and whether you've eaten lunch. It's all biology. There is no non-biological you pulling the levers.
No ghost in the machine. Incredible stuff. And that, unfortunately, is all the time we have for today on Penplexity. A massive thank you to my fantastic guests, Sarah and Ethan.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, James.
So what do you think we should tackle next? A different book? A philosophical concept? Let us know. Find us on all the socials at Penplexity or visit our website at penplexity.com. Until next time, keep reading and keep getting perplexed. Hello, and welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the most fascinating ideas from the world of books. I'm your host, James, and with me, as always, are the brilliant Sarah and Ethan.
Hello. Hello.
Good to be here.
Today, we are diving headfirst into a real mind-bender. It's Chapter 5 from Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will, and this one is called A Primer on Chaos.
Oh, I loved this chapter. It felt like stepping through the looking glass.
It really did. Sapolsky starts by saying, every thought you have, every itch you scratch, it's all determined by what came just before it. And for centuries, science's big idea was reductionism. To understand something complex, you just take it apart.
Like a watch, that's the metaphor he uses. If your watch stops ticking, you open it up, find the one tiny broken gear, replace it, and boom, it works again. Simple. Clean. Cause and effect.
Right! But then he says, but what if that isn't how it works? What if you're dealing not with a watch, but with a cloud that won't rain? You can't just find a broken gear inside a cloud. And that's where he throws us into the deep end, with chaos theory.
And it all starts with a guy going to lunch, which is maybe the most relatable science story I've ever heard.
Laughs. It's the best. Okay, so this meteorologist, Edward Lorenz, is at MIT in the 60s. He's using this, let's call it a vintage computer, to model the weather. He's running a program, it's churning out predictions, and he decides to take a break.
And to save time when he comes back, he doesn't start the simulation from the very beginning. He just types in the numbers from where he left off to get it going again.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. The printout he was reading from had rounded one of the numbers. The actual value in the simulation was 0.506127, but the printout just said 0.506. A difference of what, 0.000127? It's nothing.
It's less than nothing. I wouldn't even notice that.
No one would. So he types in the shorter, rounded number, 0.506, and lets the program run. And at first, it looks pretty similar to the pre-lunch run. But then, it starts to drift, and then it drifts a lot. And pretty soon, the new weather prediction is wildly, completely, unpredictably different from the original one.
And that is the lightning strike moment. In a simple, linear world, a tiny error at the start should lead to a tiny, predictable error at the end. But Lorenz discovered that in complex systems, a tiny, immeasurable difference in the initial conditions can lead to enormous, cascading, unpredictable differences in the outcome.
The butterfly effect.
That's the one. The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil could set off a chain of events that leads to a tornado in Texas. It's such a powerful metaphor.
So, does this mean reductionism is just wrong? Is science broken?
Not at all, and Sapolsky is careful to point that out. Reductionism is still incredibly powerful. If you want to know how a specific drug works, you need to find the exact molecule it targets. That's a reductive process. But chaos theory tells us that some systems, especially complex ones, with 3 or more interacting variables, just don't behave that way.
Yeah, he uses the 3-body problem. Predict the movement of the Earth and the Moon? Easy. Add the Sun into the mix? Suddenly, everything is influencing everything else's influence. And the whole thing becomes nonlinear and unpredictable. It becomes a cloud, not a watch.
Wow. Okay, the part that really made this click for me, but also made my brain feel like it was melting, was the cellular automata, the grids.
Oh my gosh, I could play with those all day. It makes the idea so visible. So you have a row of squares, right? Each one is either black or white. That's your starting condition.
Row 1. Got it.
Then you apply a simple rule. Sapolsky focuses on Rule 22 feet. To figure out if a square in the next row, row 2, should be black or white, you look at the 3 squares directly above it in row 1. And the rule is basically, if one and only one of those 3 squares is black, then the square below becomes black, otherwise it stays white.
It's a completely deterministic rule, there's no randomness.
None at all. But when you apply that simple rule over and over and over again, generating hundreds of rows, you get these stunning, complex, organic-looking patterns that writhe and grow and change. And here's the chaotic part. You cannot look at a starting row and predict what the pattern will look like 1,000 rows down. It's impossible. You have to actually run the simulation step by step by step.
No shortcuts.
And this is crucial, Sapolsky points out that you can have 2 totally different starting rows that, after a few hundred steps, converge and produce the exact same final pattern.
Wait, what? So, if you see the final pattern, you can't even be sure how it started?
Exactly. You can't predict the future from the beginning, and you can't reliably know the past from the end. It's wild.
This is all about creating incredibly complex and dynamic things from just a set of rules and an initial design. It reminds me of our sponsor for this episode. Penplexity is supported by Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a leading institution for creative media education, offering industry-focused diploma and professional certificate programs in areas like game design, game art, concept art, and more. They're committed to providing students with hands-on training, expert instructors, and strong industry connections to prepare them for successful careers in these exciting fields. They're hoping to reach listeners who are passionate about these industries and looking for a practical, career-oriented education to help them break in or advance their skills. Their website is mages.edu.sg. That's mages.edu.sg.
You know, that is a fantastic fit for this chapter. The cellular automata we were just talking about, they look exactly like concept art or the building blocks for a procedurally generated world in a video game. If you're the kind of person who sees Rule 22 and thinks, whoa, I want to make stuff like that, then game design sounds like it would be right up your alley.
It's the perfect synthesis of logic and emergent creativity. You're defining the rules of a system to allow for complex, engaging, and beautiful outcomes. That's game design, and that's chaos theory in a nutshell. Listeners should definitely visit mages.edu.sg to learn more.
Absolutely. A huge thank you to Mages Institute for their support. So getting back to it, Sapolsky lays out this amazing, beautiful science, but he keeps hammering this one point home. This is not where you find free will.
Because it's just so tempting, right? You see this seemingly magical, unpredictable pattern emerge from nothing, and your brain wants to scream, freedom, creation. But he's heading us off at the pass.
He's saying that even though the system is unpredictable to us, it's still perfectly deterministic. Each row in the cellular automaton is caused, without exception, by the row before it applying a fixed rule. The butterfly's wing flap causes the subsequent cascade. It's not uncaused, it's just so complex we can't trace the cause and effect chain easily.
So unpredictable is not the same as uncaused.
That's the money shot. That's the whole point.
All right, this has my head spinning in the best way. Let's take a few questions from our listeners. First up, we've got a question from Leo in Toronto, who asks, is weather prediction basically useless then, because of chaos theory? Ethan?
That's a great question, Leo. It's not useless, but it explains the limits. It's precisely why a 10-day forecast comes with percentages and probabilities, and why it's much less reliable than a 24-hour forecast. The tiny errors in our initial measurements of temperature, wind, and humidity just magnify exponentially over time. So we get better with more data and better models, but we can never be perfect. Chaos theory guarantees it.
Right. Okay, next one is from Aisha in London. She says, the cellular automata example with the single mutation changing everything was amazing. Does this happen in real biology, Sarah?
Oh, 100%, Aisha. That's the beauty of Sapolsky's example. A single letter change in the DNA code of a gene, a point mutation, can be the difference between a healthy life and a devastating genetic disease. It's the ultimate biological example of sensitive dependence on initial conditions. One tiny change in the starting code can lead to a completely different life.
Incredible. Okay, last question is from Kenji in Tokyo. If two different starting states can lead to the same end state, does that mean the past doesn't matter?
That is a wonderfully tricky question, Kenji. It doesn't mean the past doesn't matter. It means the past is sometimes unknowable from our vantage point in the present. The causal chain that led to that end state absolutely existed. It was just one of a few possibilities. Sapolsky's whole argument is that just because we can't see the full chain of cause and effect, we can't then conclude that the chain doesn't exist.
Fantastic answers. This has been a whirlwind. Sarah, if our listeners are going to walk away with just a few core ideas from this chapter, what should they be?
Okay, key takeaways. Number 1, some complex systems are like clouds, not watches. You can't understand them by just taking them apart. Number 2, the butterfly effect is real. Tiny changes at the start can have huge, unpredictable effects down the line. And number 3, the most important one for Sapolsky's argument, unpredictable does not mean uncaused. Chaos theory is not a loophole for free will. It's just a deeper, and honestly, way more interesting form of determinism.
A deeper, weirder, more beautiful form of determinism. I love it. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Penplexity. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ethan.
Anytime.
My pleasure.
What book or big idea should we get perplexed by next? Let us know. You can find us on all the social media platforms at Penplexity and on our website, penplexity.com. Thanks for listening. Hello, and welcome to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the best ideas from the books we love. I'm your host, James, and I'm here with my two favorite people to get perplexed with. First, the woman who can explain anything with a story and a smile, Sarah.
Hey, James! So excited to be here. I've got my tea, I've got my book notes. Ew, I'm ready to dive in.
And the man who looks at a beautiful sunset and probably thinks about gravitational lensing, the wonderfully witty Dr. Ethan.
The physics of atmospheric particulate scattering, actually. But hello, it's good to be here.
Of course it is. All right, today we are tackling a doozy. It's Chapter 6, Is Your Free Will Chaotic? From Robert Sapolsky's book, Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. And, wow, just wow. This chapter starts with chaos theory, stoner physicists, and Harlequin romance novels. What a trip.
It really is. And it's so funny because chaos theory had this huge pop culture moment, right? I remember seeing those fractal posters everywhere. But Sapolsky points out that it started so quietly. Like the guy who discovered it, Lorenz, published his paper in 1963, and crickets.
Well, the acolytes he eventually gathered were, and I quote, a group of physics grad students at UC Santa Cruz who supposedly spent a lot of time stoned and studied things like the chaoticism of how faucets drip, so perhaps not the most mainstream initial audience.
The faucet drip apostles. I love that. But it did explode, right? Sapolsky lists all these fields, economics, art, even theology, that just grabbed onto chaos theory.
Oh, totally. And he gets to the heart of the matter pretty quickly. People started seeing chaos theory, with its butterflies flapping their wings and causing hurricanes, as the perfect little hideout for free will. The argument basically became, look, things are unpredictable, therefore we are free.
Right, and Sapolsky calls this wrong conclusion number 1, the freely choosing cloud. So, break this down for us, Sarah. Why is it wrong?
Okay, so the core mistake, and this is so important, is confusing unpredictable with undetermined. They are not the same thing. Sapolsky quotes all these thinkers, physicists and philosophers, who basically say, because chaotic systems are unpredictable, the question of free will is open again. But that's a huge leap.
It's the difference between epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is about what we can know or predict. Ontology is about what is. A chaotic system can be ontologically deterministic, meaning it follows strict, unbreakable rules, but epistemologically unpredictable, meaning we, with our limited measuring tools, can never know the outcome in advance.
Okay, hold on. My brain just did a little pop. So it's like the weather. It's a chaotic system. I can't know for sure if it'll rain on my picnic in 3 weeks. But the weather is still following the laws of physics, right? It's not just choosing to rain out of spite.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy, and Sapolsky uses this brilliant example of a cellular automaton, something called Rule 22. It's a super simple set of rules, but when you apply them over and over, you get this incredibly complex, unpredictable-looking pattern. But it's completely deterministic. If you run the program 1,000,000 times from the same starting point, you will get the exact same pattern every single time. No little box in the grid chose to be black instead of white. It was determined by the previous row and the rules.
And that's the core of it. There is no uncaused box in the pattern. Just as Sapolsky argues, there is no uncaused neuron firing in the brain.
Whoa, okay. And he drives this home with that frontotemporal dementia example, which was just chilling.
It's devastatingly effective. He says, imagine it's 1922. A man starts acting erratically, shoplifting. You'd say, he chose to do that. It's his fault. Now, fast forward to 2022. We can sequence his genome and find a specific mutation that we know causes this exact behavioral change by age 60. Suddenly, it's not a choice. It's a deterministic biological process. So Sapolsky's killer question is, what changed? Only our knowledge. The underlying biology was always there.
So free will becomes this god of the gaps. It's what we call the stuff we just don't understand yet.
Precisely. Free will exists only until there is a decrease in our ignorance. That is a profoundly uncomfortable but logically sound statement.
Man, this is heavy stuff. You know, thinking about building these complex, deterministic worlds, it actually makes me think of our sponsor for this episode.
Oh, that's a good connection.
Right? This episode of Penplexity is brought to you by Mages Institute in Singapore. They're a leading school for creative media, offering programs in things like game design, game art, and concept art. When you think about it, game designers are creators of entire universes that run on deterministic rules, just like that cellular automaton, but they give rise to these incredibly complex and seemingly unpredictable experiences for the player.
That's so true. You're creating a world with a fixed set of rules, but the beauty comes from the complex, chaotic interactions that emerge. If you're passionate about building those kinds of worlds, you should definitely check them out. They offer really practical, hands-on training.
And strong industry connections are key. It's one thing to understand the theory, it's another to apply it in a successful career. Mages seems focused on that bridge. The website is mages.edu.sg. For anyone listening who's a creative, it's worth a look.
Absolutely. That's mages.edu.sg. Go build some beautiful, deterministic worlds. Okay, so back to Sapolsky's takedown of free will. There was a wrong conclusion number 2. What was that about?
Okay, so this one is called a causeless fire. It deals with this other feature of chaos called convergence. This is the idea that very different starting points can lead to the exact same outcome. So if you land in the middle of a chaotic system, you can't be sure how you got there. There could be multiple possible histories.
The technical term is overdetermination, when two separate causal chains are each sufficient to produce the same result.
And the fire example he used was wild. 2 different people negligently start 2 separate fires, they merge, and burn down a 3rd building. And for a while, the courts would say neither person was responsible because the building would have burned down anyway. That's nuts.
Right? It's like the firing squad example, where one soldier is randomly given a blank bullet. Everyone can tell themselves, maybe it wasn't me. It's a psychological trick. And the argument from chaos theory becomes, if we can't trace back the cause to one single starting point, maybe there's room for something else, something uncaused, like free will.
But this is, again, a logical fallacy. Sapolsky's final point here is brilliant. He says, just because you can't tell which of 2 towers of turtles propping you up goes all the way down doesn't mean that you're floating in the air. The inability to do radical eliminative reductionism, to rule out every cause but one, doesn't prove indeterminism. It just proves the history is complex and unknowable to us. But it's not uncaused.
You're not floating in the air. That's going to stick with me. Okay, we have some fantastic questions from our listeners that I think will help us wrap our heads around this. First question is from Maya in Toronto. She asks, Sapolsky briefly mentions that in some fields like cardiology, too little chaoticism is a bad thing. What does that mean? Ethan, that sounds like one for you.
An excellent question. It refers to heart rate variability. A perfectly metronomically regular heartbeat is actually a sign of a diseased or aging heart. A healthy heart has a subtly chaotic, variable rhythm. This complexity allows it to adapt better to changing demands. So, in this biological context, chaos means health and resilience, while rigid predictability signals pathology. The system needs that dynamic variability to function.
Fascinating. So a little bit of chaos is good. All right, next question from Leo in Austin. Can you give another simple analogy for the difference between determinism and predictability, Sarah?
Oh, I like this one. Okay, think of your favorite movie. The first time you watch it, it's completely unpredictable, right? You're on the edge of your seat. But the movie itself is fully deterministic. The scenes are in a fixed order, the dialogue is set, the ending is already filmed. It was always going to end that way. Your knowledge of it changed, but the film itself didn't. Our universe, Sapolsky argues, is like that film. We're just watching it for the first time.
Love that. Simple, clear, perfect. Okay, last question is from Chloe in London, and I have to ask it. The chapter mentions a Harlequin romance novel called Chaos Theory. I have to know, did any of you read it for research?
Oh my gosh, I was so tempted. I looked it up. The hero is a handsome engineer Will Darling with insouciant bedroom eyes, who is also a nerd because he wears glasses. I decided reading Sapolsky's breakdown was probably enough, but part of me still wants to know if Will Darling used strange attractors as a pickup line.
The romance we all deserve. Okay, this has been an incredible discussion. Before we wrap up, Sarah, could you summarize the one or two key takeaways from this chapter?
Sure. I think it comes down to the two wrong conclusions Sapolsky debunks. First, chaos theory is not a lifeline for free will, because being unpredictable is not the same as being undetermined. Deterministic systems can be wildly unpredictable. And second, the fact that we can't always trace an event back to a single knowable cause doesn't mean it was uncaused. It just means the causes are complex. Ultimately, chaos theory, far from saving free will, is just another beautiful example of a deterministic world that doesn't need it.
Brilliantly put. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ethan. This was mind-bending in the best possible way. To our listeners, what book or big idea should Penplexity get perplexed by next? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials at Penplexity and on our website, penplexity.com. Until next time, keep reading and stay curious. Hello and welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the best ideas from the world's most fascinating books. I'm your host, James, and as always, I am joined by the wonderfully insightful Sarah and the relentlessly brilliant Ethan.
Hello, hello. So excited for today's topic.
Greetings. I've been looking forward to this. It's where things get weird.
Weird is our favorite flavor. Today we're diving into Chapter 7 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, and this chapter is called A Primer on Emergent Complexity. And folks, if you've ever looked at an ant colony or a flock of birds and just thought, how? This chapter is for you.
Oh, it's so cool. Sapolsky basically kicks things off by saying, look, we've talked about chaos and how tiny starting differences can lead to huge, unpredictable outcomes. But this is different. This isn't about tiny differences. This is about what happens when you get a huge quantity of simple, identical things together.
He uses this amazing image. Picture a field full of tiny crawling bricks. One brick just wanders aimlessly. A few bricks just bump into each other. But 100 zillion of them, they self-assemble into the Palace of Versailles.
And the critical distinction, which is a theme throughout this whole chapter, is that there's no architect. There's no blueprint. The Versailles-ness, it just emerges from the quantity of bricks and a few simple rules they follow when they interact. Sapolsky's point is that this looks like magic. It feels like agency or free will, but it's just as deterministic as a billiard ball collision.
Right. So it's not free will, but it's also not just simple cause and effect. It's something else. So what's an example of something that isn't this?
He gives a hilarious one. A marching band forming a giant Michael Jackson moonwalking. You've got 300 people in uniforms, all fungible, interchangeable parts. And they create this complex, amazing image. But it's not emergence because there's a mastermind. There's a choreographer who had a vision, made a blueprint, and told every single person exactly where to step and when. That's top-down control.
Precisely. Emergence is bottom-up. The classic example he uses is the ant colony. One ant is, well, it's just an ant wandering around. But thousands of them, they create a society. They have job specializations. They build bridges with their own bodies. They farm fungi in climate-controlled chambers. And no single ant has any clue about the bigger picture. No ant is the queen of urban planning.
So what are the rules for this magic to happen? Or, I guess, this science to happen?
Sapolsky lays it out pretty clearly. You need a huge number of simple agents, like ants or bricks. These agents have a tiny, tiny repertoire of things they can do. And they follow a few simple rules based only on interacting with their immediate neighbors. Like, an ant's rule might be, walk with this pebble until you bump another ant with a pebble, then drop yours. That's it.
And from that, you get these, quote, irreducible properties, like wetness. A single molecule of H2O isn't wet. Wetness is a property that emerges from the collective. You can't predict wetness by just studying one molecule in isolation. As the physicist Philip Anderson put it, more is different.
More is different. I like that. It feels profound. And these systems, they're not just complex, they're adaptive? Like, they solve problems?
This is the mind-blowing part. He talks about the, quote, traveling salesman problem. It's a classic math problem. What's the shortest possible route to visit a bunch of cities just once? If you have 15 cities, there are over 80 billion possible routes. A computer would take forever to brute force that.
But an ant colony can find a near-optimal solution in a fraction of the time. Not because any single ant is a math genius, but because of a simple emergent process.
Wait, how? How do ants solve a math problem?
Okay, so it's this two-phase process. First, scouts go out and explore. In this case, virtual ants take random paths between all the cities or food sites. As they go, they leave a pheromone trail. Here's the key. A shorter route means a quicker round trip, so the pheromone on that path is laid down more frequently and is therefore stronger and evaporates slower. The quality of the solution, the shortness of the path, is broadcast as a stronger signal.
Then comes phase 2. The rest of the ants wander randomly, and their rule is simply, if you stumble upon a pheromone trail, follow it. Because the shorter paths have stronger trails, they attract more ants, who then lay down their own pheromones, making the trail even stronger. It's a rich get-richer feedback loop. The bad, inefficient routes literally just evaporate away. The optimal solution emerges without a central command.
Wow. That's swarm intelligence, right? The same thing works for bees picking the best flower patch. The better the patch, the longer they do their little waggle dance, which makes it more likely other bees will bump into them and get recruited. No bee compares all the options. The comparison is implicit in the system.
And it's not just insects. This is where it gets crazy. He talks about slime molds.
Slime molds? The things that just sort of ooze?
The very same. They put a slime mold in a maze with oat flakes at different spots. At first, it just oozes everywhere, filling every corridor. But then, it retracts from all the dead ends and the long, inefficient paths until it's only using the single shortest route to the food. It solves the maze.
The peak of this was the Tokyo subway experiment. Scientists placed oat flakes on a map in the locations of Tokyo and its surrounding train stations. They plopped a slime mold on Tokyo. And after a while, the network of tubules the slime mold formed to connect all the oat flakes was stunningly similar to the actual, human-engineered Tokyo rail system.
A brainless, single-celled organism designed a more efficient rail network than teams of very much brained urban planners. That's both incredible and a little insulting to urban planners.
It operates on a similar principle. The better food source, or the shorter path, generates a stronger contractile force in the tubules, which mechanically recruits the rest of the slime mold to that path. Again, it's a rich-get-richer system based on broadcasting quality. No decisions, just physics and chemistry.
This idea of building complex things from simple rules, It reminds me a little of game design. You create the assets, the engine, the rules of the world, and then this whole interactive experience just emerges from it, which, speaking of creating amazing worlds, this episode of Penplexity is brought to you by the Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a leading institution for creative media education, offering incredible diploma and certificate programs in things like game design, game art, and concept art. If you've ever dreamed of being the one who sets the rules for these emergent, beautiful worlds, this is for you.
That's such a perfect connection. Game design is the ultimate emergent system. You don't program every possible player action. You create a robust set of rules and mechanics, and the player's creativity and the game's physics create the experience. Mages teaches you how to be that rule maker for these incredible digital worlds.
Indeed. It's not the top-down Michael Jackson halftime show approach. It's giving players the simple bricks and the rules, and allowing a Versailles of gameplay to emerge. It's a very practical application of these profound principles. If that sounds like your calling, you should definitely check them out.
Absolutely. They provide hands-on training, expert instructors, and strong industry connections to get you ready for a career. Visit mages.edu.sg to learn more. That's mages.edu.sg. A huge thank you to Mages Institute for their support. All right, so we've got swarm intelligence. What's the next emergent motif Sapolsky brings up?
Fractals. This one is so visual. The idea of fitting an infinitely large thing into an infinitely small space.
That sounds impossible.
In traditional geometry, yes. But with fractals, it's routine. Think of your circulatory system. You have something like 48,000 miles of capillaries, enough to wrap around the Earth twice, but they only take up about 3% of your body's volume. It's an almost infinitely large surface area in a finite volume.
And it's built with a super simple, scale-free instruction. A tube grows to a certain length relative to its diameter, and then it splits in two. And those new, smaller tubes do the exact same thing. And so on, and so on. It's a simple, iterative rule that creates staggering complexity. You don't need a specific gene for every single branch of every single blood vessel.
It's a beautiful example of informational compression. The complexity is in the final structure, not in the instructions to build it. And what's wild is that the genes that code for this process, they're not, quote, circulatory system genes, they're bifurcating system genes. The same genes are used to build the branching patterns in your lungs and in individual neurons.
So my brain, my lungs, and my blood vessels are all built using the same fundamental playbook? That's wild. It feels like nature is really, really efficient.
Totally. And he has this other cool example, these neuronal shopping malls.
Neuronal shopping malls?
Yeah. If you just dump a bunch of newly born neurons in a petri dish, they don't just stay scattered. They self-organize. They clump together into these little clusters, like malls, and then they send out long-distance connections, like highways, to the other malls.
And it all happens through a sequence of simple rules about attraction and repulsion signals. First, they all secrete an attractant, so they clump up. But once a clump gets too big and the neurons in the middle get starved for oxygen, they start secreting a repellent, which stops the clumping. Then, another signal is secreted that tells them to wire up locally. And once that's done, another signal tells them to stop wiring locally and start sending out long-distance feelers to other clumps.
It's like a perfectly choreographed construction project with no foreman.
And no choreography, just a cascade of simple, local, deterministic chemical reactions. It simulates intelligence, as Thomas Huxley said about the bee.
Okay, this has been a whirlwind of complexity from simplicity. I think it's time to take a few questions from our listeners. First question is from Leo in Portland. Leo asks, you talked about the 80/20ths rule or power law distributions. It makes sense for things like wealth or crime, but how is it adaptive in a biological system? Isn't it better to treat all things equally?
That's an excellent question. It's adaptive because it balances exploration and exploitation. Sapolsky gives the example of animals foraging. When food is scarce, it's not efficient to just wander randomly. The optimal strategy, which many species have evolved, is to spend about 80% of your effort on short, local searches, exploiting the area you know, and 20% on rare, long-distance forays to explore for new patches. A power law distribution is the perfect mathematical description of that trade-off. It's about optimizing resource allocation in an uncertain world.
Yeah, And it applies to our brains too. Most of our neural connections are super local, within little processing modules. That makes us really good and fast at familiar tasks. But we have a small number of long-distance connections that link different modules. Those are crucial for creativity, for making novel connections and solving new problems. The 80/20th split gives you a brain that's both efficient and creative.
Fantastic. Okay, next question is from Chloe in London. The brain organoid example is terrifying and amazing. If they self-organize and produce brainwaves, does that mean they are conscious? Where does Sapolsky draw the line?
Sapolsky doesn't explicitly address consciousness in these organoids, but it certainly pushes the boundary of our definitions. What he would argue, I think, is that it demolishes the idea of a ghost in the machine. There is no magical spark of brainness needed. You just put the component parts, the neurons, together under the right conditions, and brain-like structures and activity emerge. It's a powerful statement that what we think of as the self is an emergent property of a biological system, not an external entity directing it.
A profound and slightly unsettling thought. Last question, from Maria in Sao Paulo. She asks, if all these complex systems, from ants to brains, are built without a blueprint, why do humans seem so obsessed with blueprints, master plans, and top-down control?
Oh, I love that question. I think it's because our conscious minds love a narrative. We love a story with a hero, a planner, an agent who makes a choice. It's very hard for us to intuitively grasp that something as complex as a city or an economy could just happen without a central planner making, quote, decisions. We project our own sense of agency onto the world.
And we often get it wrong. The marching band forming Michael Jackson is how we think complex things should be built. But the ant colony is how they are actually built in nature. Our intuition is for the blueprint, but biology's genius is for emergence.
Incredible stuff. All right, as we wrap up, Sarah, can you try to distill this sprawling, complex chapter into one key takeaway for us?
I'll try. I think the core message is that stunningly complex, adaptive, and optimized systems do not require a central planner, a blueprint, or freely willed choices. They can, and do, emerge spontaneously from huge numbers of simple components, following a few simple, local rules. From slime molds to your own brain, the universe is full of self-organizing wonders that look like magic but are the product of deterministic bottom-up processes. More, as Ethan said, is different.
More is different. A perfect place to end. Thank you, Sarah and Ethan, for another mind-bending conversation.
Anytime.
A pleasure.
And thank you all for listening to Penplexity. What book or big idea should we get perplexed by next? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials at Penplexity and on our website, penplexity.com. Until next time, keep reading and keep wondering. Welcome back, folks, to Penplexity, the show where we get tangled up in the best bits of books. I'm your host, James, and with me, as always, are the dynamic duo who make the complex feel, well, slightly less complex. We have the ever-brilliant and relatable Sarah.
Hello, hello. Happy to be here and ready to emerge into this topic.
Oh, a pun already. I love it. And the man who can find a paradox in a piece of toast, the wonderfully witty Ethan.
A pleasure. Though I'd argue the paradox isn't in the toast, but in our perception of its toastedness. But that's a topic for another day.
Of course it is. Chuckles. Today, we are wrestling with a beast of a chapter. It's Chapter 8 from Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will, and it's called Does Your Free Will Just Emerge? So the argument so far in the book is that we're basically biological machines. But this chapter tackles the idea that maybe, just maybe, when you put all the machine parts together, something new and free emerges. Sarah, set the scene for us. What's the core idea here?
Okay, so it's actually a pretty cool starting point. Everyone, including the people who believe in free will, agrees on one thing. A single, solitary neuron doesn't have free will. It's not sitting in your brain defying physics. It's just a little biological switch.
Correct. Philosopher Christian List is quoted saying you're looking for free will at the wrong level if you're looking at individual neurons.
Exactly. So the argument is that free will is an emergent higher-level phenomenon. It's like one ant is just an ant. But a million ants? They create these incredibly complex colonies with traffic rules and farming. That's emergence. The idea is that our brains do the same thing, but instead of a colony, they create free will.
Okay, that sounds plausible. Right? Like, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But I'm guessing Sapolsky isn't buying it.
Not for a second. Laughs. He basically breaks it down into 3 major problems with this emergence idea. The first one he calls chaotic missteps redux.
Redux. So we've heard this before?
Yep, it's the same mistake people make with chaos theory. They confuse something being unpredictable with it being indeterministic. He uses Christian List's model as a prime example. List basically says, look, if you have 5 very similar but technically different starting points, and you just kinda round them off and decide they're the same one starting point. Look, that one starting point can lead to 5 different outcomes. Voila, indeterminism.
And this is where the logic completely collapses. You can't just decide that 2 different things are identical because it's convenient for your model. Sapolsky's analogy here is just perfect. He shows pictures of 6 molecules that look incredibly similar. Like, you'd fail a chemistry test trying to spot the differences. But one is a type of estrogen, and another is testosterone.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if you just coarse grain them, as List puts it, and say EH, they're basically the same molecule, well, sometimes you'll get a penis, sometimes a vagina. You haven't proven emergent indeterminism, you've just proven that you ignored a crucial difference in the initial conditions. Similar is not the same as identical.
Right. So problem number 1 is, you can't cheat by blurring your eyes and calling different things the same thing. What's the next mistake?
Problem number 2 is what he calls orphans running wild. This is the idea that once something emerges, it's orphaned from the chain of cause and effect. It can just float off and do its own thing, totally independent of the bricks that built it.
Like a rebellious teenager leaving home.
Exactly like that. Laughs. But in philosophy, this leads to a split. You have weak emergence and strong emergence. Weak emergence is like the ant colony. No matter how cool it is, it's still made of ants and limited by what ants can actually do. An ant colony can't suddenly decide to invent a rocket ship.
Whereas strong emergence is where the new state truly is untethered from its origins. It can do things its parts can't. And this is what you would need for the kind of free will people want. But, as Sapolsky points out, most serious thinkers, even those who entertain the idea, call strong emergence uncomfortably like magic. You're essentially getting something from nothing. It violates everything we know.
Yeah, even philosophers who study this say the only possible candidate for strong emergence might be consciousness itself. And even then, they're mostly like, probably not. So we're left with weak emergence, which means you're still constrained by your brain and your neurons. No orphans running wild.
Okay, so the emergent system can't just do whatever it wants. It's still on a leash held by its building blocks. That brings us to problem 3.
Problem 3 is defying gravity. This is a bit more subtle. It's about downward causation. The idea that the emergent, big picture us can reach down and change how the little parts work.
And Sapolsky agrees this happens. To a point. The example he gives is fascinating. It's a famous social conformity study. You're shown 3 lines, and one is obviously shorter than the others. But you're in a room of actors who all say a longer line is the shortest. A shocking number of people will eventually agree with the group.
Yeah, the Asch conformity experiments, peer pressure is a powerful thing.
It's more than that. The brain scans show what's happening. In some people, you see the amygdala light up. That's anxiety. They know it's the wrong answer, but they go along to get along. But in others, something wilder happens. Their visual cortex activates, the part of the brain that sees things. The emergent pressure to conform is literally reaching down and telling the vision neurons, hey, you saw it wrong. That long line is actually short. Fix it.
That is deeply unsettling. So the emergent state can change the reductive parts.
Yes, but here's the absolute key. It doesn't change what the neuron is. It doesn't give it new powers. A visual cortex neuron's job is to fire in response to certain stimuli. All that's happened is that the stimulus has changed from photons of light hitting the retina to social pressure from the frontal cortex. The neuron is still just a neuron. It's still subject to gravity.
Precisely. The mistake is believing that downward causation makes the building blocks work differently. Sapolsky's line is perfect. The whole point of emergence is that those idiotically simple little building blocks remain precisely as idiotically simple. They don't suddenly learn French. They don't become causeless causes. The bricks don't stop being brickish.
The bricks don't stop being brickish. I love that. You know, this idea of simple building blocks coming together to form something complex and amazing, without the blocks themselves changing, it reminds me of world building in video games or animation. You have these basic assets, these simple rules of code, and from them you can build these incredible emergent worlds for players to explore.
Oh, that's a great connection.
Which, believe it or not, is the perfect time to thank our sponsor. This episode of Penplexity is brought to you by Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a leading institution for creative media education, offering industry-focused diploma and professional certificate programs in things like game design, game art, concept art, and more. They are all about giving students hands-on training with expert instructors to prepare them for careers in these exact fields.
That's so cool. So if you're listening and you're passionate about building those emergent worlds, instead of just talking about them, you should absolutely check them out. It's all about learning how the building blocks work, right?
A direct application of the principles we're discussing. Understanding the fundamental components is the only way to build a robust, complex system, be it a brain or a video game. Their website is mages.edu.sg. For anyone looking for a practical, career-oriented education in these fields, it seems like a fantastic place to start.
Couldn't agree more. That's mages.edu.sg. Go have a look, and we're back. All right, it's that time. We've got a few questions from our listeners. First one is from Maya on Instagram. Maya asks, so if social pressure can change what my brain sees, does that mean I'm not responsible for what I believe? Ethan, what do you think?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? From Sapolsky's perspective, responsibility is the wrong framework. The conformity experiment doesn't show you have free will to resist. It shows that your brain is a system responding to various inputs. Some are photons, some are social cues. The fact that social cues can override photons is just a demonstration of the brain's wiring and your personal history, not a moment of choice in the mystical sense.
Heavy stuff. Okay, next question from Ben via email. Could strong emergence just be a scientific phenomenon we haven't discovered yet? Like how we didn't know about quantum mechanics 150 years ago. Sarah?
That's the God of the gaps argument, right? Anything we don't understand, we put free will or strong emergence in there. It's possible, I guess. But Sapolsky's whole book is about how the more we learn about biology, physics, and neuroscience, the smaller those gaps get. There's just no room left for the magic of strong emergence to hide. It would have to violate everything we currently know about causality, which is a very, very tall order.
A tall order indeed. Last question, this is from Chloe on X. So is Sapolsky basically just saying we're all just really fancy, complicated ants?
Chuckles. In a manner of speaking, yes. The emphasis is on fancy and complicated. An ant colony is emergent and complex. A human brain and the consciousness it produces are orders of magnitude more complex. But the underlying principle holds. We are a system made of component parts, and we are constrained by the rules that govern those parts. The complexity is breathtaking, but it doesn't create a ghost in the machine that can defy the machine's own mechanics.
Fantastically put. All right, before we wrap this up, Sarah, can you boil it all down for us? What are the key takeaways from this chapter on emergence?
Sure. I think there are three main things to remember. First, unpredictable is not the same thing as undetermined. Just because a system is complex and you can't guess the outcome doesn't mean the outcome wasn't determined by the starting conditions. Second, emergent systems, however cool, are still on a leash. They're constrained by their building blocks. No quote, orphans running wild. And third, while the big picture can influence the small parts, that's downward causation, it can't fundamentally change what those parts are. The bricks always stay brick-ish.
The bricks stay brick-ish. That is our mantra for the week. Sarah, Ethan, thank you both for making the complex. Well, you know, this has been awesome.
Anytime.
A pleasure.
And to all of you listening, that's a wrap on another episode of Penplexity. What should we tackle next? A different chapter? A different book entirely? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials at Penplexity. That's Penplexity. And on our website at penplexity.com. Until next time, keep reading and keep getting perplexed. Hello, and welcome to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the weird and wonderful world of book chapters. I'm your host, James, and with me are my two favorite people to get perplexed with. First, the woman who can make any complex idea feel like a chat over coffee, the lovely Sarah.
Hey, James! So excited for this one. It's a weird one.
And our resident scientist, the man who keeps us grounded when our ideas float off into the ether, the witty Ethan.
Grounded is a relative term today, James. We're diving into the subatomic, so all bets are off.
Right you are. Today, we are tackling Chapter 9 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. It's called A Primer on Quantum Indeterminacy, and honestly, Sapolsky himself says he was dreading writing it. He compares the topic to a strange attractor for crackpot ideas, which, naturally, makes me want to dive right in.
He's not wrong. It's one of those topics where the science is so counterintuitive that it's easy for people to just run with it in some very strange directions. But the core of the chapter is this. Yes, the universe seems to stop being predictable at the super tiny level. But, and it's a huge but, that doesn't mean you can use quantum physics to prove free will.
Okay, so let's start with the low-rent version of randomness, as Sapolsky calls it, Brownian motion. This feels more manageable. Sarah, what are we talking about here?
Okay, so picture a dark room with just one sunbeam cutting through it. You've all seen this, right? The little dust specks dancing and jerking around in the light? That's basically Brownian motion. It's not that the dust is alive. It's that tiny particles, in this case, photons of light, are constantly smacking into them, randomly, from all directions, making them jiggle.
So my dusty apartment is just a large-scale physics experiment. I feel much better about my housekeeping now.
You should. It's a foundational principle. Einstein himself formalized it in 1905. The key is that a particle's position in one moment isn't dependent on its position a moment before. It's truly stochastic. And it's not just dust. It has profound biological implications.
Totally. Sapolsky gives some amazing examples. Like, when a fertilized egg divides for the first time, all the little powerhouses, the mitochondria, they don't split perfectly 50-50. It's a random Brownian split. So right from the very first division, those two new cells are already slightly different. It's baked-in randomness from the start.
And it can be sinister. The chapter mentions the beta-amyloid peptides in Alzheimer's disease. These protein fragments float around, and if they randomly bump into each other, they stick together. Brownian motion helps explain the probability of those fatal little collisions that form plaques in the brain.
Wow, okay, that went from dancing dust to existential dread really fast. But the chapter also talks about animals using this randomness, right? The levee walk?
Yes, I love this. So if a fish is in an area with tons of food, it just forages nearby. But if food is scarce, the most efficient way to find something is to switch to a totally random search pattern called a levee walk. It's this mix of short little jiggles and long, random, straight lines. And it's not just predators. Our own white blood cells do this to hunt down sparse pathogens in our bodies.
It's a beautiful example of biology evolving to exploit a fundamental physical property. It's randomness, but it's not free will. The fish or the cell isn't choosing a random path. It's switching to a hardwired, evolutionarily optimized random walk algorithm. The randomness is a tool, not an agent.
Okay, my brain is warmed up. I think I'm ready. Let's do the quantum stuff. Sarah, brace me for the double-slit experiment.
Deep breath. So you shoot a beam of light at a wall with two vertical slits in it. Behind that is another wall to see where the light lands. What you see is that the light acts like a wave, creating an interference pattern. Classic physics, no big deal.
Okay, so far, so good. Waves in water make sense.
Now, do it with electrons. Same thing. They act like a wave. Here's the kicker. Shoot one single electron at a time. Logically, it should go through one slit or the other. But it doesn't. The single electron acts like a wave and passes through both slits at the same time.
Wait, what? No, how can one thing be in two places at once? That breaks my entire concept of a thing.
Welcome to quantum mechanics. It's called superposition. The electron exists as a cloud of probabilities, not a definite point, until it's measured. And that's where, as Sapolsky puts it, things get weirder.
Exactly, because if you put a little detector at the slits to see which one the electron goes through, it suddenly stops being a wave. The act of measuring it collapses the wave function, and the electron behaves like a nice, normal particle, picking one slit to go through, not both.
So by looking at it, you change what it does? That feels like a superpower. Can I change reality by staring at it intently?
No, this is the exact New Agey leap Sapolsky warns about. The measurement in this context is a physical interaction. It's not about consciousness or your mind's intent. A machine does the measuring, but the core mystery, why observation collapses this probabilistic wave into a single reality, is what physicists call the measurement problem. We still don't fully know.
And this leads directly to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. When it's a wave, you can know its momentum but not its exact location, because it's everywhere at once. Once you measure it and collapse it into a particle, you know its location, but now you can't know its momentum. You can never know both perfectly.
Okay, my head is spinning. And we haven't even gotten to the spooky action part yet, have we? Entanglement.
Oh, this is my favorite. You can have two particles, say electrons, that are linked or entangled. Their properties are perfectly correlated. If one spins left, the other instantly spins right. Always.
The spooky part, as Einstein derisively called it, is the instantly. They can be in the same atom or across the room and this has been experimentally verified, nearly 900 miles apart. If you measure one and see it spinning left, you know the other one, 900 miles away, is spinning right at that very same instant. Faster than the speed of light.
That's impossible. Nothing is faster than the speed of light. That's like rule number one of the universe.
It doesn't seem to be for this. Information is being communicated, somehow, instantaneously. Einstein hated it, thought there must be some hidden variables we just hadn't found yet. But a physicist named John Bell proved Einstein's math was off, and experiments have since confirmed Bell was right. The spooky action is real. We're even exploring it for things like quantum computing.
Quantum computing. Designing new realities. It's amazing how this stuff that sounds like pure science fiction is actually the foundation for future technology. And you know, speaking of building the future and designing incredible new worlds, this feels like a perfect moment to thank our sponsor. This episode of Penplexity is brought to you by Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a leading school for creative media, offering programs and stuff that feels just as mind-bending as quantum physics, like game design, game art, and concept art. They provide hands-on training with expert instructors to get you ready for a real career in these fields. It's all about taking these complex, creative ideas and making them a reality.
That's a fantastic connection. It's like we're talking about the fundamental building blocks of reality, and they're teaching people how to build entirely new virtual realities. If you're passionate about that stuff, you should definitely check them out.
Absolutely, it's practical application of creative and technical principles. If our listeners are looking to break into those industries, Mages sounds like a superb place to start. Visit them at mages.edu.sg.
That's mages.edu.sg. A huge thank you to Mages Institute for their support. All right, one last bit of quantum weirdness from the chapter before we hit the mailbag. Quantum tunneling?
This one is actually pretty easy after all that. Since a particle in a wave state is a cloud of probabilities, there's a tiny, non-zero chance that one of its possible locations is on the other side of a solid wall. And sometimes it just appears there. It tunnels through. It happens.
So you're telling me there's a chance I could just walk through a wall?
The probability of all the trillions upon trillions of particles that make up you all tunneling in the same direction at the same instant is so infinitesimally small that you would have to wait for trillions of lifetimes of the universe to see it happen. So I'd stick to using the door.
Laughs, right. Good advice. Okay, let's open the Penplexity mailbag and see what questions you all have. First question is from Leo in Portland. Leo asks, is it possible that what we call quantum randomness isn't truly random, but just a result of hidden variables that we haven't discovered yet, like Einstein thought? Ethan?
That's the million-dollar question, Leo. It's the core of the Einstein-Bohr debate. While you can never say never in science, the experiments based on John Bell's work, called Bell's theorem tests, have made it extremely difficult for local hidden variable theories to be correct. They've essentially shown that if there are hidden variables, they must be, quote, non-local, capable of that spooky, faster-than-light influence, which kind of defeats the purpose of what Einstein wanted, which was a clean, local, deterministic universe. Most physicists today lean towards the Copenhagen interpretation that the randomness is fundamental, not just a lack of knowledge.
Fascinating. Okay, next question is from Maya in London. The book mentions entanglement in living systems between a photon and bacteria. Could our own brain cells be entangled? And could that be a source for consciousness or complex thought? Sarah, what do you think?
That's a super tempting idea, Maya, and people are definitely exploring it. It's called the quantum brain hypothesis. The problem is scale and environment. Quantum effects like entanglement are incredibly fragile. They require extreme cold and isolation. The brain is warm, wet, and noisy. It's an environment that would almost certainly cause decoherence, the breakdown of any quantum state, almost instantly. So while it's been shown in a very specific photosynthetic process in bacteria, scaling that up to explain consciousness in a hot, messy brain is a leap that, right now, there's just no evidence for.
So, probably not, but it's a cool thought. Last question, from Ben in Toronto. If the division of cells is random from the very beginning, how do you ever end up with an ordered, functional human being instead of just a chaotic lump of mismatched cells?
Excellent question, Ben. It comes down to the law of large numbers. The random split of mitochondria in one cell division might make a difference to those two cells. But when you have trillions of cells, those small random variations tend to average out. Furthermore, there are powerful deterministic developmental programs layered on top of that low-level randomness. Genes dictate a blueprint. Build an arm here, make a heart cell there. The randomness provides slight variation, which is actually crucial for things like a robust immune system, but the overall structure is very much determined by higher-order genetic and developmental processes. Randomness is a feature, not the sole architect.
Great answer. That clarifies a lot. Okay, as we wrap up, I'm going to throw it to Sarah. What are the key takeaways we should leave with from this mind-bending chapter?
I think there are three big ones. First, the simple, deterministic clockwork universe we thought we lived in. It's not real. At the most fundamental, subatomic level, the universe really does seem to operate on probability and indeterminism. Second, this isn't just abstract physics. Versions of this randomness, like Brownian motion, have real, tangible effects in biology, from how our cells divide to how animals find food. And third, and this is Sapolsky's whole point, you can't make the leap from the universe is random at a quantum level to therefore I have free will. The mechanisms just don't scale up, and it's a playground for wishful thinking, not a sound scientific argument.
Perfectly put. So the world is weirder than we think, but not necessarily in the way that gives us superpowers. That's a wrap for this episode of Penplexity. A huge thank you to my wonderful guests, Sarah and Ethan.
Anytime, James.
A pleasure.
What perplexing topic should we tackle next? Let us know. You can find us on all social media at Penplexity, that's Penplexity, and on our website at penplexity.com. Until next time, stay curious. Hello, and welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the threads of a single book chapter. I'm your host, James, and with me, as always, are the dynamic duo of Deep Dives, the ever-relatable Sarah, and our resident witty scientist, Ethan.
Hey! So excited for this one. It gets weird.
Weird is my baseline. Happy to be here.
Glad to hear it, because today's chapter is a doozy. We're jumping into Chapter 10 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, titled, Is Your Free Will Random? And Sapolsky basically kicks the door in on this one, going after anyone who's ever slapped the word quantum in front of another word to make it sound profound.
Oh my gosh, yes. He comes out swinging. He lists quantum metaphysics, quantum philosophy, quantum psychology. He even mentions quantum activism. It's this whole cottage industry of taking the genuine strangeness of quantum physics and, well, turning it into mystical gibberish.
Like Deepak Chopra, who he calls out by name for quantum healing, promising to reverse aging and cure cancer. That's a bold claim.
It's the just add quantum approach to salesmanship. The argument is fundamentally, things are weird at a subatomic level, therefore you can think your way to a promotion. The logic, it has a few holes. A few galaxy-sized holes.
Exactly. Sapolsky's point is that people hijack concepts like quantum entanglement, where particles are connected over vast distances, to say, see, we're all one, or that you can collapse a quantum wave with your intention and manifest your dreams. It's very Mary Poppins, as he puts it.
He does seem particularly annoyed by this. But he also brings up a more serious case, a Nobel laureate, Sir John Eccles. This wasn't some New Age guru, right? This was a top-tier neuroscientist.
Right, and that's what makes it challenging. Eccles was a pioneer in understanding synapses. But later in his career, he went full-on dualist. He proposed that the mind creates psychons, which sound like something from a cheesy sci-fi movie, that control our neurons through quantum tunneling. He even became a trialist, making room for a soul or spirit.
And that's where he lost the scientific community. By his later years, mentioning his name just got eye rolls. It's a tragic story, really. A brilliant mind getting lost in mysticism. Sapolsky quotes a review that basically called it a noble mind overthrown.
Okay, so after dismissing the gurus and eulogizing Eccles, Sapolsky gets to the core of it. He presents 3, as he calls them, quote, fatal problems with using quantum mechanics to save free will. Problem number 1 is bubbling up. What's that about?
This is the big one. The whole idea rests on a tiny, random quantum event down at the level of a single electron, somehow having a big enough effect to change how a neuron fires, and then how a brain circuit works, and then how you behave. Can these tiny effects bubble up and actually matter on our scale?
And the overwhelming consensus is, no, the brain is, as physicists say, warm, wet, and noisy. Any single quantum effect is almost instantly washed out by the trillions of other events happening. It's called decoherence. The weirdness just disappears into the background noise. It's like trying to hear a single raindrop in the middle of a hurricane.
But people have tried to find a way, right? Sapolsky mentions microtubules.
Oh, the microtubule guys. Hameroff and Penrose. Penrose is another Nobel Prize winner, so it's a heavyweight theory. They proposed that these structures inside neurons, the microtubules, are perfect for quantum effects, and that this is where consciousness and free will come from.
Except, as Sapolsky hilariously puts it, that's like saying, the knowledge contained in a library emanates not from the books, but from the little carts used to transport books around. Neuroscientists and physicists have pretty much torn the theory apart. The quantum states would last for fractions of a nanosecond, not nearly long enough to do anything meaningful. The whole idea is off by many, many orders of magnitude.
So the math just doesn't add up. But what about all that stuff about leaky synapses and neurons firing spontaneously? Sapolsky talks about this scientist, Katz, who found that little packets of neurotransmitter would just release randomly.
Yeah, these miniature end plate potentials, it looks like a purely random uncaused event, a little hiccup of neurotransmitter. And the quantum free willers jump on this and say, aha, here it is, the building block of free will.
But there's a catch, I'm guessing.
There are about 4 catches. First, it's not the same machinery as intentional neurotransmitter release. It's a different button. Second, this spontaneous release is itself regulated by things like hormones and your experiences. Deterministic factors can make this, quote, randomness more or less likely. Sapolsky calls it, quote, determined indeterminacy. The system decides when to be random.
And it serves a purpose. It's like keeping the car's battery from dying. It keeps the synapse ready to go. So it's not some rogue, uncaused event. It's a regulated, purposeful feature. And finally, you're still stuck with the bubbling up problem. One of these tiny hiccups is nothing compared to a full-on action potential.
It's like the system has a generate random static button that it presses for maintenance, not to make life-altering decisions. That makes a lot of sense. You know, thinking about building these incredibly complex systems, whether it's the brain or something else, makes me think of our sponsor. This episode of Penplexity is brought to you by Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a leading institution for creative media education, offering diploma and professional certificate programs in fields like game design, game art, and concept art. They're all about hands-on training from expert instructors with strong industry connections.
That's such a perfect fit for this chapter. We're talking about how you can't just magically wish a complex outcome into existence. You need to understand the building blocks, the rules, the systems. Whether you're building a character in a game or trying to understand your own, you need to know how the components work together. It's not magic, it's design and mechanics.
Exactly, and Mages teaches you those mechanics. They're hoping to reach listeners who are passionate about these creative industries and want a real, practical education to break in or level up their skills. It's about building things, not just wishing for them. Check them out at mages.edu.sg. That's mages.edu.sg.
Go check them out, mages.edu.sg. Okay, so we've established the bubbling up problem is a problem. What's Sapolsky's second fatal flaw?
This one, for me, is just devastatingly simple. Let's pretend the bubbling up problem doesn't exist. Let's say our actions are directly caused by quantum randomness. Well, then our behavior would be random.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You wouldn't be making a choice based on your character or values. You'd just be doing random stuff. As Sapolsky quotes Sam Harris, every thought and action would seem to merit the statement, "I don't know what came over me." It's not free will, it's just chaos. It's the opposite of who we think we are.
As one philosopher put it, chance is as relentless as necessity. Randomness isn't freedom. When we talk about moral responsibility, we're talking about consistency, about character, not about why Mother Teresa might have randomly decided to mug someone in Stockholm. Randomness explains nothing about the consistent parts of us that we actually care about.
Which leads directly into problem number 3, which is the attempt to get around that. How do you harness the randomness?
Right. This is the last-ditch effort. Okay, so it's random, but maybe the you, the agent, can either filter the randomness or somehow mess with it.
Okay, a filter model. What does that look like?
Think of evolution. You have random mutations, and then natural selection filters for the ones that work. The idea here, from thinkers like Daniel Dennett, is that your brain generates a bunch of random considerations, and then your rational, agentic self filters through them and picks the best one.
But the problem is, where does the filter come from? Where do your values, your character, your reasoning process that you use to do the filtering, where did all that come from? And we're right back to chapter 3. It's the sum of your biology and your environment. You didn't choose your filter, so it's not free will, it's just a more complicated deterministic process.
It just pushes the problem back one step. And the other model? Messing with the randomness?
This is where Sapolsky gets really skeptical. This is the idea of downward causation, that a higher level you can reach down and mess with the quantum events themselves to make them come out the way you want.
And this, to me, is where it just becomes word salad. Sapolsky tries to be respectful, but he basically says he can't figure out what they're even proposing. How does an informational pattern that is not a material force somehow cause physical events? He says it feels like they're arguing that quantum indeterminacy works for magical reasons. It's dualism. It's a ghost in the machine, just a very, very tiny ghost messing with electrons.
So basically, the quantum escape hatch is a dead end. The effects don't bubble up. If they did, it would just be random noise. And trying to harness the noise leads you back to determinism or magic. A pretty thorough takedown. All right, that was a lot. We have a few questions from our listeners that I think will help tie some of this together. First one is from Leo in Portland. Leo asks, you talked about Sir John Eccles, the Nobel laureate. How can someone so brilliant, a genuine pioneer in his field, end up believing in what Sapolsky calls mysticism and psychons?
That's a fantastic and kind of sad question. It shows that being brilliant in one domain doesn't make you immune to wishful thinking in another. Eccles did foundational, materialist work on how synapses function. But he was also a devout man who seemingly couldn't reconcile a purely physical brain with the idea of a soul or a self. So, late in his career, he tried to invent a scientific-sounding bridge for his faith. It's a cautionary tale about how powerful the desire to believe in something non-material can be, even for the most rigorous minds.
A great answer. Next question is from Maya in Toronto. She asks, if the brain uses determined indeterminacy, as you said, doesn't that tiny bit of built-in randomness still provide a crack for free will to slip through? It's not totally determined if there's a random element.
That's a really sharp question, Maya. But the key is in the first word, determined. The system itself, the deterministic biological machine, is what decides when and how much randomness to allow. It's a feature that serves a biological purpose, like keeping a synapse primed. The randomness isn't an external, uncaused force hijacking the system. It's a tool used by the system. The choice to use the tool, and the nature of the tool itself, are all products of prior causes. So that crack is, unfortunately, sealed.
Sealed shut. Okay, last question. This is from David in London, and it gets to the heart of it. He writes, like the student Sapolsky mentions at the end of the chapter, I still feel like I choose to pick up a pen. The feeling is overwhelming. How do we reconcile this incredibly strong feeling of agency with the science that says it's an illusion?
That is the question, isn't it? And Sapolsky acknowledges it. He doesn't deny the feeling. The feeling is real. The illusion is that the feeling is an accurate explanation of how the behavior came to be. The feeling of, I just decided that, is itself a product of the brain, a story the brain tells itself after the fact to make sense of the output. The student picking up the pen thinks it's a spontaneous act of will, but Sapolsky lists a dozen biological and environmental factors, from their hormone levels to their cultural background, that made that act more probable. The feeling is the last step in the process, not the first.
Wow. Okay, to wrap this all up, Sarah, can you give us the key takeaways from this chapter?
Absolutely. I think there are 3 big ones. First, don't be fooled by quantum speak. Slapping the word quantum on something doesn't make it profound, and it certainly doesn't prove free will. Second, quantum weirdness stays in the quantum world. It gets washed out in the warm, wet brain and doesn't bubble up to affect our behavior. And third, and most importantly, even if it did bubble up, it would just produce randomness, which is the opposite of the consistent, character-driven agency that we think of as free will. It's not a door to freedom, it's a door to chaos.
A perfect summary. Thank you, Sarah and Ethan, for untangling that incredibly complex chapter with me.
Anytime.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for listening to Penplexity. What book or chapter should we get perplexed by next? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials at Penplexity and on our website, penplexity.com. Until next time, keep reading. Welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast that gets tangled up in the best parts of books so you don't have to. I'm your host, James, and today, oh boy, today we are diving headfirst into a question that keeps philosophers, scientists, and maybe your uncle up at night. We're in Robert Sapolsky's book, Determined, looking at Chapter 11, titled Will We Run Amok? The big, scary idea, if we accept there's no free will, what stops us all from just causing chaos? To help me untangle this, I have my 2 favorite brains with me. The always brilliant and relatable Sarah.
Hey, James! So excited for this one. It's a doozy.
And the man who probably has an EEG running on himself as we speak, the wonderfully witty Ethan.
The readiness potential is, I assure you, off the charts. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Will we run amok? If science proves we're just biological machines, is it just spittle-flecked, gibbering havoc from here on out?
Well, Sapolsky definitely leans into that visual. And he starts by acknowledging that this fear is very real. It's the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card, right? Don't blame me, my neurons made me do it. He even connects it to the original Malay word for amok, meng amok, which describes someone who just explodes in violence and was traditionally thought to be possessed by an evil spirit. So they weren't held responsible.
Which is really just a hop, skip, and a jump away from, don't blame me, I was possessed by Hantu Balian, the evil tiger spirit of my prefrontal cortex. The underlying principle is a lack of culpability. The question is whether that fear is actually supported by the data.
Okay, so what does the data say? Because Sapolsky walks us through some early studies that sound, well, pretty terrifying.
They really do. At first, the answer seemed to be a resounding, yes, we will run amok. The setup was simple: get people to doubt free will. The most common way was to have them read a passage from Francis Crick's book that basically concludes who you are is nothing but a pack of neurons.
Just a pack of neurons. Cheery stuff. And what happened to these poor, neuron-packed subjects?
They became, well, jerks. Amok-ish, as Sapolsky puts it. In experiments, they were more likely to cheat on a test. They took more money than their fair share from a pot. And this is my favorite. They got to choose how much hot sauce to give someone who'd annoyed them, and they nearly doubled the dose. Retributive hot sauce is a real thing.
And it wasn't just behavior. Brain scans showed a physiological change. The early readiness potential, which is like the brain's signal for intentional effort, went down. And another signal, the error-related negativity, which is your brain's oops, I messed up alarm, also got weaker. Essentially, people seemed to be trying less and caring less when they made mistakes.
Okay, so at this point I'm thinking maybe we should burn this book before it gets out. Case closed, right? No free will equals more jerks.
Not so fast. This is where Sapolsky says, naturally, things are more complicated. And boy, are they. First, all those effects were actually pretty small. But the real nail in the coffin was replication. Or rather, the failure to replicate.
Precisely. A massive 2022 meta-analysis looking at 145 different experiments found the truth. Yes, reading a passage from Crick might make you believe in free will a tiny bit less, but it had no consistent, reliable effect on whether you behaved ethically or not. The whole we'll all run amok theory just fizzled out under scrutiny.
Okay, that's a huge relief. So if the direct link is a dud, why does he spend the next 10 pages talking about atheists? It felt like a total detour.
It's such a clever parallel, though. He's testing the same logic with a different variable. The first fear is, without free will, we'll be immoral. The second, very similar fear is, without God judging us, we'll be immoral. So he asks the question, do atheists run amok?
And society certainly thinks they do. The book highlights how deep the prejudice is. There's a story about a company called Atheist Shoes, whose packages to the US kept getting delayed or lost by postal workers. It's this deep-seated, gut-level belief that you can't be good without God.
So are they? Are atheists less moral? Putting the postal service aside.
Well, if you just ask people, religious people report being more moral. But Sapolsky points out they also score higher on wanting to appear socially desirable. When you look at what people actually do, like donating blood, tipping, helping strangers, the difference pretty much disappears.
And then you have to control for confounding variables. In the US, for example, religious people are more likely to be female, older, and have stronger social networks. All of those things, independent of religion, are linked to more pro-social behavior. Once you account for that, the gap closes even more.
Wow. Okay. But the most shocking bit for me was the in-group versus out-group thing. That seemed really important.
It's huge. A lot of religious prosociality is directed towards their own group, fellow church members, other people of the same faith. When it comes to helping them, the outsiders, atheists are often more generous and accepting. In fact, some studies show that religious primes can actually make religious people more prejudiced against outgroups.
And the ultimate test case is entire societies. Sapolsky points to Scandinavia. These are the most secular, least religious countries in the world. And they aren't hellscapes. They have lower crime, lower inequality, better health outcomes, and better social welfare. He calls them, quote, downright Edenic. The idea that society morally collapses without religion just doesn't hold water.
Okay, my mind is officially a little bit blown. It's about having a structure, a set of principles, whether they come from religion or a secular source. And having the skills to build your own world, to create your own structures, that reminds me of our fantastic sponsor for today's episode. This is a special one, folks. We're sponsored by the Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages Institute is a leading school for creative media education. They offer industry-focused diploma and professional certificate programs in fields like game design, game art, concept art, and more. It's all about hands-on training from expert instructors with strong industry connections, preparing students for real careers in these incredibly exciting fields.
That's such a great fit for this topic, James. It's about creation. Whether you think your path is determined or not, you still have to build it. You still have to do the work. Learning a practical, creative skill like game design at a place like Mages is a powerful way to shape your future.
And from a scientific perspective, the structured learning, the principles of design, the community, that's the kind of secular framework Sapolsky argues is so vital for developing a strong moral identity and pro-social behavior. It's not just about talent. It's about the discipline and principles you learn. So if you're passionate about these fields, definitely check them out.
You heard them. Visit mages.edu.sg to learn more. That's mages.edu.sg. A huge thank you to Mages Institute for their support. And we are back. We got time for a few questions from our listeners. This first one is from Leo in London. Leo asks, so if the early studies about free will skepticism were flawed, why did they see any negative effects at all? What was really going on there? Ethan, that sounds like one for you.
An excellent question, Leo. Sapolsky saves the best for last with this. He proposes a U-shaped curve. On one side, you have committed believers in free will. On the other, you have committed determinists. And in the bottom, in the trough, you have people whose beliefs are a bit wobbly or indifferent. Those early experiments weren't studying committed determinists. They were taking believers and shaking their faith, knocking them into that confused trough. It was the instability of their worldview, not the worldview itself, that led to the amok-ish behavior.
So it's the fall that hurts, not the landing. Got it. Next up, we have Maya in Mumbai, who asks, does this mean it doesn't really matter what you believe, as long as you believe it strongly and have thought about it? Sarah?
Maya, you've completely nailed it. That is the core message. Sapolsky talks about a key study by Krohn and Levy that did exactly what the earlier studies didn't. It compared long-term, committed free will skeptics with hardcore believers. And their ethical behavior? It was identical. The thing that actually predicted who was most honest and generous was how much a person defined themselves by their moral identity. It was the people who had a strong, considered why, be it religious, secular, deterministic, whatever, who acted the best.
Incredible. So the real battle isn't believer versus skeptic. It's the considered versus the whatever crowd. Okay, last question is from Ben in Boston. So what about me? I'm probably in that trough in the middle. I'm not a hardcore believer either way. Am I doomed to be a bad tipper?
No, Ben, you are not doomed. Sapolsky's point isn't that the people in the middle are inherently immoral. It's that in extreme circumstances, like classic obedience studies, we're looking at people who risked their lives in the Holocaust. It was the people on the firm ends of the spectrum, the extreme believers and extreme non-believers, who were most likely to resist and do the right thing. The takeaway for Ben is that the goal isn't to be extreme, but to develop a considered moral framework you can rely on when things get tough.
A considered moral framework. I love that. All right, as we wrap up, Sarah, can you boil it all down for us? What are the key takeaways from Chapter 11?
Of course. The number one takeaway is that the fear that we'll all run amok if we stop believing in free will is a myth. The data just doesn't back it up. The real difference in who behaves morally isn't between free will believers and skeptics, or theists and atheists. It's between people who have a thought-out, deeply held moral identity and those who don't. It's the commitment to your principles, whatever they are, that truly matters.
Perfectly said. So it's not about losing your moral compass, it's about taking the time to figure out which way it's pointing in the first place. What a mind-bending chapter. And that is all the time we have for today. What should Penplexity get tangled up in next? Let us know. Find us on all the socials. We are at Penplexity and on our website, penplexity.com. A huge thank you to Sarah and Ethan, and thanks to all of you for listening. Hello and welcome to Penplexity, the show that gets tangled up in the best ideas from the world of books. I'm your host, James, and with me, as always, are the wonderfully relatable Sarah and the brilliantly witty Ethan.
Hey everyone! So excited for today's topic.
Hello. Prepared to have your intuition systematically dismantled.
And we'll need that preparation. Today we're diving headfirst into Chapter 12 of Robert Sapolsky's book, Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. The chapter is called The Ancient Gears Within Us. How does change happen? And it's a doozy.
It really is. The whole book's premise is that we have no free will, which is a tough pill to swallow. So this chapter asks the giant follow-up question. If everything is determined, how do we ever change? How do I decide to eat a brownie or not be a jerk on the freeway?
Exactly. And Sapolsky's answer is basically, you don't. Your mind doesn't change itself. Your mind, he says, is changed by circumstances around you. To prove it, he takes us on a journey that starts with a sea slug.
Yes, the mighty Aplysia, the California sea hare. Neuroscientists are obsessed with this thing. And it has this really simple protective reflex. If you lightly touch the area around its gill, the siphon, the gill retracts. It's like a flinch.
It's a beautiful piece of biological engineering. A sensory neuron detects the touch and activates a motor neuron, which pulls the gill in. Simple. Sapolsky even shows there's a backup circuit and an off switch so the gill can come back out. It's a clean, logical machine.
But that's just the basic model. The real magic happens when the slug learns. This is where it gets weird. You can shock the slug's tail, right?
Yeah. And if you shock its tail, it sends this little alarm signal through its body. So if you then touch its siphon shortly after, the gill withdrawal is way more dramatic. It stays pulled in for twice as long. The slug has learned, in a very basic way, that the world is a little more menacing right now.
Okay, so one shock, a more jumpy slug. But it gets more intense, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. This is the hierarchy he talks about. One shock gives you a short-term change. But what if you shock its tail 4 times? Now, if you touch the siphon within the next few hours, the gill retracts for 3 times as long. The memory is stronger and lasts longer.
And the how is what's crucial. Sapolsky breaks down the molecular biology. After one shock, some chemical stuff, as he calls it, is released inside the neuron that just makes it dump more neurotransmitter. It's a temporary boost. But with 4 shocks, there's so much of this stuff that it flips a genetic switch. It activates a gene that produces a protein to stabilize the whole system, making the memory last for hours.
And then there's the final level. A massive cluster of shocks, like on successive days. Now you're talking about a change that lasts for weeks. Humongous amounts of stuff activate a whole string of genes that literally start a construction project. They build an entirely new synapse, a new connection between neurons.
Wait. So the slug is so traumatized it physically rewires its own brain? It builds new parts?
Precisely. It's not deciding to be more vigilant. Its nervous system was changed by its experience in a predictable, mechanistic way. Sapolsky's point is that you can explain the entire change in behavior without ever needing to invoke free will. It's just a machine responding to its environment.
Okay, that's incredible for a slug. But the huge leap is his claim that our brains, my brain, works the same way. That seems, I don't know, a bit of a stretch.
It feels like it. But he bridges that gap so well with the next example, eye blink conditioning. Everyone knows this one, kind of. It's like Pavlov's dogs, but with your eyes. A puff of air makes you blink. That's an unconditioned reflex. Now, pair a tone with the air puff over and over again.
And eventually, you blink just from hearing the tone, before the puff even happens.
Correct. And the circuit for this is fascinating. The brain has what he calls a, quote, coincidence detector neuron, a neuron that only gets excited when the signal for the tone and the signal for the puff arrive at the same time. When that happens repeatedly, the connection gets stronger. And the molecules that do the strengthening are the same ones from the sea slug, the CAMP, the PKA, the Krebs. It's the same ancient biological machinery.
It's wild, right? We haven't shared a common ancestor with the sea slug for over 500 million years, but our neurons use the same internal toolkit to learn from experience.
That is genuinely humbling. But he doesn't stop there. He says our life history affects how well this toolkit even works.
Yes, the rat study. If a rat pup experiences, quote, maternal separation stress early in life, as an adult, it's physically harder for its brain to form that conditioned eye blink. The early life adversity epigenetically changed its brain, making it more sensitive to stress hormones, which disrupts the learning circuit. So if that rat fails to learn, it's not a moral failure. It's a biological consequence of a history it had no control over.
Wow, okay, that really reframes things. And speaking of being shaped by your environment and learning new things, this is actually a perfect time to thank our sponsor, Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages Institute is a leading institution for creative media education, offering amazing diploma and professional certificate programs in things like game design, game art, concept art, and a whole lot more. They're all about providing students with hands-on training, expert instructors, and strong industry connections to get you ready for a career in these super exciting fields.
You know, that is such a great fit for this chapter. Sapolsky is talking about how experiences physically change your brain and build new circuits. That's literally what an education at Mages does. You get these new inputs, this expert training, and you build the neural pathways for a career in game design. Your brain is being changed by that structured, creative environment.
It's a perfect, real-world example. It's a way to intentionally expose your brain to the kinds of inputs that produce the beneficial, long-term, structural changes Sapolsky describes. It's learning made manifest. If you're passionate about these fields, you should really visit their website.
Absolutely. Check them out at mages.edu.sg. That's mages.edu.s-g. A huge thank you to Mages Institute for their support. All right, so we've covered slugs and eye blinks, but the real world is messier. How does this scale up to complex human behavior, like prejudice?
Yeah, this is where he turns the lens on us, and it gets uncomfortable. He moves to the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and he shows how you can condition fear. Pair a neutral stimulus, like a tone, with a painful one, like a shock, and soon the tone itself becomes terrifying. Then he says, this is exactly what demagogues do.
He uses the Trump quote, right?
He does. The one where he says Mexico is sending, quote, rapists. Rapist is the unconditioned stimulus. It's a word we've already learned to associate with fear and disgust. The group, Mexicans, is the neutral stimulus. By repeating them together, the goal is to make the neutral group trigger the same fear response.
And he correctly points out this is a very old, very dark political tool. The chapter has that chilling matching game associating different groups with vermin or cockroaches or thieves. It's about exploiting this ancient learning mechanism in our amygdala to create an us versus them mentality. And your susceptibility to this isn't a choice either. It depends on your stress levels, your upbringing, your fatigue, your genes, all factors you don't control.
So our most deeply held beliefs could just be the result of a biological process we're not even aware of. Oof. Okay, so for the last big example, he brings it to a really personal level, driving on the freeway.
I loved this one. You're driving, a car wants to merge. Your first instinct is to speed up and be a jerk. But then you hesitate. You remember that 30 seconds ago you saw a car with one of those commit random acts of kindness bumper stickers, and that memory is just enough to tip the scales. You hit the brake and let them in.
He models this as competing circuits, a do-it circuit, fueled by your hunger, your stress, the fact you were bullied in middle school, and a don't be kind circuit, fueled by that time you went to Quaker meetings, or your mom's lessons on charity. The bumper sticker didn't cause a profound moral awakening. It just added a tiny bit of extra electrochemical oomph to the don't circuit, which was enough to change the behavioral outcome in that moment.
And those circuits themselves are built how?
Through a lifetime of learning. He gives this great simple model. You have neurons, for examples, like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., etc. They all connect to a, quote, generalist neuron that starts to represent the abstract category of, quote, people who died for their beliefs. These category neurons then build higher and higher level networks representing things like hope or agency. Our experiences strengthen or weaken these networks every single day.
It's the sea slugs mechanism, just scaled up to an unimaginable complexity. It's how we build our entire moral and conceptual world, one association at a time. Change happens when an input alters the synaptic weights in these vast networks.
My brain feels thoroughly rewired right now. Okay, we have some time for a few questions from listeners. The first one is from Leo, who asks, if our behavior is just a result of these circuits, does that mean we can't ever truly change for the better? Ethan, what do you think?
That's the beautiful paradox at the heart of the chapter. Sapolsky would argue it means the exact opposite. Because change is a physical biological mechanism, it means we can be changed. If we had some magical, non-physical free will, how would you even begin to change it? But because we are biological machines, we know the inputs matter. Reading a book, having a conversation, seeing a bumper sticker, these things physically alter us. We don't choose to change in some spooky way, but we absolutely can be changed, and often for the better.
Great point. Okay, next question is from Aisha. She asks, the aplesia example is about trauma. Is all significant brain change based on negative experiences, Sarah?
That is such a good question. And no, absolutely not. The trauma is just a really powerful and scientifically clean way to demonstrate the mechanism. But the same process of strengthening synapses and building new ones underlies positive change. Learning to play the piano, mastering a new language, falling in love, that's all your brain being physically rewired by positive experiences. The brain's mechanism for change is neutral. It's the experience itself, the input, that can be positive or negative.
Makes sense. And one last question from Mike. Is Sapolsky saying our brain is just a computer and that a complex figure like Gandhi is just another data point, like Guy in a loincloth?
In a sense, yes, but that doesn't cheapen it. He shows how that one, quote, data point of Gandhi can be a node in countless different networks simultaneously. He's part of the, quote, people who died for their beliefs network, sure. But also, as the book jokes, the subjects of biopic movies network. And yes, the guys in loincloths network. The richness and meaning of who Gandhi is to us emerges from the web of all those overlapping, interconnected networks. It's not reductionism. It's an explanation for complexity using these fundamental building blocks.
That's a perfect way to put it. So, Sarah, to wrap this all up in a bow, what is the key takeaway from this chapter?
I think the key takeaway is that change is not magic, it's a physical process. Our brains are constantly being sculpted by our lives, from the tiniest experience to the biggest life events. The tools our brain uses are ancient and biological. We aren't freely choosing to become different people. We are constantly being changed by the world around us. And recognizing that mechanism is the first step toward figuring out how to build a better world and better selves.
We are being changed. That is a thought that will stick with me. And that is all the time we have for today. What should Penplexity get tangled up in next? Let us know. You can find us on social media at Penplexity or visit our website at penplexity.com. A huge thank you to Sarah and Ethan and to all of you for listening. Hello and welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the brilliant and sometimes baffling world of books. I'm your host, James, and as always, I am joined by the two people I'd most want to be stuck in a library with, the wonderfully insightful Sarah, and our resident scientist, the ever-sharp Ethan.
Hello, hello. So excited for today's chapter. It's a doozy.
Ready to have my deterministic worldview both challenged and reinforced. It's my favorite kind of Tuesday.
Isn't it, though? So today we are diving headfirst into Chapter 13 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, a Science of Life Without Free Will. The chapter is called We Really Have Done This Before, and wow. It basically asks if we can stop hating people for doing terrible things by understanding the biology behind their actions. Sapolsky's argument is, we've already done it. Many times.
Right. He sets up this almost sarcastic scenario at the beginning. Step 1, life is great. Step 2, someone does something horrific to a loved one. Step 3, a scientist gives you a PowerPoint on determinism. And step 4, you're suddenly like, oh, okay, I'm convinced. I don't hate the perpetrator anymore. And then he just writes, yeah, right. He knows how impossible that sounds.
It's a brilliant rhetorical move. He acknowledges the immense emotional mountain we have to climb before he even asks us to start walking. He's not dismissing the rage or the pain. He's saying, I know this feels impossible, but let's look at the historical record.
And his big first example is epilepsy, the falling sickness. I had no idea the history was so gruesome.
Oh, it's horrifying. For literally thousands of years, the dominant explanation wasn't neurological. It was demonic possession. Mesopotamians called it the hand of sin. And if you had a grand mal seizure, it was seen as the work of a demon you yourself had welcomed in.
And the cures were just stomach churning, drinking gladiator blood, concoctions of animal genitals, and crocodile feces. It's a stark reminder that before we have a mechanistic understanding of something, we just make stuff up. And the stuff we make up is often terrifying and involves blaming the victim.
The book that really codified this was the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches. It was basically an instruction manual for witch hunting, and one of the signs of being a witch? Having seizures. People with haywire potassium channels, as Sapolsky puts it, were literally burned at the stake.
And even when the demonic possession idea started to fade with the Enlightenment, the blame didn't. It just changed costumes. It went from, you're possessed by Satan, to, you have a disease of moral turpitude. It was blamed on masturbation or, for women, an unseemly interest in sex. One doctor in 1800 literally blamed it on reading too many sentimental novels instead of gardening.
Which is, scientifically speaking, just as baseless as demonic possession. It's fascinating how the need to assign blame persists, even as the explanation shifts. We're desperate for attribution. It's a bug in our cognitive software.
But then, slowly, things changed. We started to understand the brain as an electrical organ. We discovered that seizures are basically electrical storms, too much excitation, or too little inhibition. And now if a driver has a seizure completely out of the blue and causes a fatal accident, we don't, string him up. We see it as a tragedy. A horrible, sickening piece of bad luck.
Exactly! That's Sapolsky's core point. We did it. We successfully subtracted blame and free will from our view of epilepsy. Society didn't collapse. In fact, it became more just and compassionate. We quarantine the problem. We suspend their driver's license until they're seizure-free, but we don't punish the person for the biological event.
It's a clean, powerful example of progress. We identified a biological cause, and our moral framework evolved to accommodate that fact. It's a stunning accomplishment, as he says.
Okay, but this is where the chapter got really hard for me. The putting our money where our mouth is section. He talks about Dorothy Bruns, Auvergne Scarlett. People who knew they had epilepsy were told not to drive, or didn't take their meds, and then drove and killed people.
This is the gut punch, isn't it? Because every instinct screams, that's different. That was a choice. They were charged with manslaughter, with murder. And Sapolsky says, no. He argues that the decision to drive without meds is just as biological as the seizure itself.
I find that so hard to swallow. The judge called one of them an abomination because he stopped his meds to enjoy liquor better. I mean, come on.
And this is the precipice Sapolsky leads us to. He's asking us to be consistent. We accept the biology of the seizure, but we refuse to accept the biology of the decision-making that leads up to it. What state was that person's frontal cortex in? What was their history of reinforcement around driving? What are their genes for impulse control? He's saying it's all one long, unbroken chain of cause and effect. It's turtles all the way down. There is no magical point where a non-biological you steps in and makes a free choice.
He even admits how hard it is. He says, I feel crazy, embarrassed, trying to make the argument. But he insists it's where the science leads. And if we are to be intellectually honest, it's a very, very difficult argument to refute, even if it feels emotionally wrong.
Wow. Okay. Let's pause there for a second, because my brain is tying itself in knots. Speaking of creating new ways of seeing the world, this chapter is all about deconstructing old, harmful narratives. And our sponsor, Mages Institute in Singapore, is all about constructing new worlds, but in a much more fun and creative way. Mages Institute is a leading institution for creative media education, offering incredible diploma and professional certificate programs. We're talking game design, game art, concept art, all the cool stuff. They give students hands-on training from expert instructors and build strong industry connections to set them up for amazing careers. If you're passionate about these fields and want a practical, career-focused education, you have to check them out. Their website is mages.edu.sg.
Seriously, do check them out. It's amazing. While we're here deconstructing the human mind, they're out there building whole new universes from scratch. That's a skill I wish I had. So go to mages.edu.sg.
Absolutely. Building a coherent world, whether it's for a game or a new social framework, requires understanding complex systems. It's a fascinating parallel. That's mages.edu.sg. Go see what they're creating.
All right, and we're back. So after wrestling with the epilepsy example, Sapolsky gives us another one where this shift has happened much more recently: schizophrenia.
Yes, and this one is just as heartbreaking. For decades, the dominant theory pushed by Freudian psychoanalysis was, quote, schizophrenogenic mothering. Basically, you got schizophrenia because your mother was cold, rejecting, domineering, a, quote, refrigerator mother.
That is just unbelievably cruel. To have a child suffering from this devastating disease and then have the experts tell you it's your fault?
It was toxic, misogynistic nonsense masquerading as science. But it was the orthodoxy. These were the chairs of psychiatry at major universities. They believed that a child's retreat into schizophrenic delusion was a rational response to an emotionally unwinnable situation created by the mother, the so-called double bind.
And Sapolsky contrasts this with what we know now. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder with strong genetic links, kicked over the edge by environmental stress. It's about excess dopamine creating, quote, aberrant salience, random thoughts or events feeling profoundly significant. It's about a thinning cortex. It is a biological, physical disease.
So how did that change? How did we get from blame the mom to it's a brain disorder?
This is the really hopeful part of the chapter, I think. It wasn't just the science. The science was there. Antipsychotic drugs that blocked dopamine worked, which should have been a clue, but the psychoanalytic establishment just dug in their heels. The change was driven by parents, people like Eleanor Owen, who started a support group that grew into the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI. They were just furious, and they channeled that rage into advocacy.
And then they got a scientific champion in E. Fuller Torrey and powerful allies, and crucially, they got media exposure. Torrey went on the Phil Donahue Show in 1988, and he didn't just talk. He showed a picture, a brain scan of twins, one with schizophrenia and one without. And you could see the difference. The enlarged ventricles in the schizophrenic twin's brain. A picture was worth 1,000 psychoanalytic theories.
Wow, so people could see with their own eyes that this was a physical thing, not some Freudian psychodrama. That's powerful.
It was a tipping point. The myth of the schizoprenogenic mother died. And again, the world became a better, more compassionate, more accurate place. We subtracted the blame.
It's an incredible story. Okay, we've got some questions coming in from listeners. Let's take the first one. This is from Alex in Toronto, who asks, if we don't blame the person who drives without their epilepsy meds, what is the deterrent? What stops everyone with a condition from just ignoring their doctor's orders, Ethan?
That's the classic question, and it's a fair one. The answer Sapolsky gives is that we replace a system of blame and retribution with a system of quarantine and risk management. We don't punish the person for having faulty brain wiring, but we also don't let them operate a 2-ton vehicle. The deterrent isn't shaming them into compliance. The consequence is the loss of a privilege for safety reasons. It's the same reason we don't let someone with severe vision impairment fly a commercial jet. It's not a moral failing. It's a practical, safety-based restriction.
That makes sense. It's a shift from you are bad to this is unsafe. Okay, next question is from Maria in London. The chapter says Eleanor Owen's rage was a catalyst for change with schizophrenia. But the book's whole point seems to be moving past blame and retribution. Isn't that a contradiction? Sarah, what do you think?
Oh, that is such a great, nuanced question. I think Sapolsky would argue that there's a difference between the primal emotion of anger and the cognitive framework of blame. The NAMI parents' rage was directed at an unjust system and a false, cruel ideology. They were angry at being blamed. That's a righteous anger that fuels a fight for truth. The retribution Sapolsky wants us to leave behind is the kind that says a person deserves to suffer for something that was ultimately outside of their control. So anger can be a tool for change, but a belief in retributive justice is what he sees as the relic of a pre-scientific age.
Brilliant. Okay, one last question. This one is from Kenji in Tokyo. The book mentions autism and PTSD as other examples. Is the transition for these conditions as complete as it is for epilepsy and schizophrenia?
Not entirely, and Sapolsky calls them snapshots mid-metamorphosis. With autism, we've thankfully moved past the vile refrigerator mother theory, but you still have the anti-vaxxer movement, which is a new, insidious form of parent blaming. With PTSD, we've come a long way from General Patton slapping a soldier for cowardice, but there's still stigma. So, no, the work isn't done. These stories show us the path, but we're still walking it on many fronts.
Incredible discussion. So, as we wrap up, what's the one big takeaway we should leave with today? Ethan, I'll throw it to you.
The key takeaway is that our sense of justice is not fixed. It can and should evolve as our scientific understanding deepens. The chapter is an optimistic historical argument. It shows us that we are capable of making these massive cognitive shifts, of subtracting blame and replacing it with understanding and compassion. The challenge is to recognize that the things we currently attribute to evil or bad choices are on the same continuum, and to have the courage to apply the same logic, even when it feels profoundly uncomfortable.
The courage to be consistent. What a perfect summary. That's all the time we have for this episode of Penplexity. A huge thank you to Sarah and Ethan. This was a mind bender.
Anytime, James.
A pleasure.
What book or big idea should we get perplexed by next? Let us know. You can find us on all social media platforms at Penplexity and on our website, penplexity.com. Hit that follow button, send us your thoughts, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome back to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the most fascinating ideas from the world of books. I'm your host, James, and as always, I am joined by the sharpest minds I know. We have the wonderfully relatable and brilliant Sarah.
Hello, hello. Happy to be here.
And the man who can make quantum physics sound like a casual chat over coffee, the witty scientist himself, Ethan.
It's all just storytelling. In the end, James. Good to be back.
Today, folks, we are diving back into Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. And we've hit a doozy of a chapter, chapter 14, titled The Joy of Punishment. Yeah, it's as cheery as it sounds.
Oh, it's a roller coaster. Sapolsky starts by basically saying, you think things are bad now. Let me tell you about the 14th century.
Right. He kicks off with this story from 1321, the leper's plot. What on earth was that about, Sarah?
Okay, so picture this. Life is awful. Plague, famine, war, everything sucks. So naturally, people need someone to blame. And they decide, collectively, that lepers are poisoning the wells.
Lepers. Okay, why?
Well, one theory was that the poison caused leprosy, so it was a recruitment drive, which is just, wow. But then, under torture, the lepers confess and say, no, the Jews are paying us to do it.
A classic scapegoat handoff. When a society is under immense stress and lacks clear explanations for its suffering, it latches onto outgroups. It's a cognitive shortcut to create order from chaos, however horrifying the result. The blame cascades to groups that are already feared or misunderstood.
Exactly. And then the Jews, also being tortured, pass the buck again and say, actually, the Muslims are funding the whole operation. So mobs just go out and burn thousands of lepers and Jews. And Sapolsky ends the story with this chilling line. Justice had been done.
Justice had been done by killing thousands of innocent people based on a conspiracy theory. It sounds disturbingly familiar. He then tells another one about the execution of this guy, Damiens?
Robert Francois Damiens. Yeah. In 1757, he tried to stab King Louis XV with basically a penknife, a superficial wound. His punishment was unbelievable. They burned the hand that held the knife, poured molten lead and boiling oil on his wounds, and then tied his limbs to 4 horses to be pulled apart.
Drawn and quartered. I've heard the term, but the reality is, ugh.
And the key detail Sapolsky highlights isn't just the brutality, it's the audience. A massive crowd gathered, renting out apartments for a better view, cheering. This wasn't a somber act of justice. It was entertainment. It was a festival of retribution.
Which brings us to Sapolsky's big point about reform. He's saying our whole criminal justice system is built on a faulty premise, so just tweaking it is useless. Right, Sarah?
Totally. He gives this amazing, absurd example of Johann Weyer, a 16th century doctor, trying to reform witch trials. Weyer wasn't saying, hey, maybe witches aren't real. Oh no, he calculated that Satan had an army of over 7 million demons. He was all in. His quote, reform, was suggesting that maybe an old woman who doesn't cry at a Bible story isn't a witch. Maybe her tear ducts are just old and dried up.
So he was trying to make an insane system slightly more scientifically accurate? That's hilarious and terrifying.
And that's Sapolsky's entire point. If the fundamental premise, in this case, that witches are real and collude with demons, is gibberish, then any reform you make is just polishing the gibberish. He's arguing that if there's no free will, the idea of retributive punishment is the same kind of gibberish. You can't make an irrational system rational by adding fairer rules.
Okay, so if we can't reform the system, what's the alternative? We can't just let dangerous people run around. This is where he brings up the quarantine model.
Yes, and it's so clear and logical. It's from the philosopher Dirk Pereboom. It has 4 simple points. A, someone can be dangerous. B, it's not their fault. C, we can constrain them to protect society. And D, and this is the most important part, we should constrain them the absolute minimal amount needed, and not an inch more.
And then another philosopher, Greg Caruso, adds a crucial layer, the public health model. It's not enough to just quarantine the person with COVID. You have to investigate the source, promote vaccines, improve sanitation. You have to address the social determinants of the illness. For crime, that means tackling the poverty, bias, and trauma that produce dangerous people in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. But it also sounds like it could get dystopian fast. What about things like indefinite detention, or what he calls pre-crime?
He addresses those. Indefinite detention is a risk, sure, but the constraint has to be the least infringement. For some, that might be life in a facility. For others, it might just be a tracking bracelet or being barred from certain jobs. And the pre-crime thing sounds scary, like Minority Report, but Ethan's point about public health is key. We already do it. We tell parents to keep sick kids home before they infect the whole class. It's pre-cough, not post-cough, constraint.
Okay. But my favorite objection is the punishment one. The idea that if we constrain someone for something that's not their fault, we have to compensate them with, like, a 5-star resort. So prisons become luxury hotels?
That's the critique from philosopher Saul Smolanski, that this would cause a motivational catastrophe. But Sapolsky uses the perfect counterexample, Norway. Their prisons are basically what Smolanski fears. Inmates have private rooms, kitchens, music studios. They can go skiing. They're treated with dignity.
And guess what? It's actually cheaper in the long run. The cost per prisoner per year is higher, but because their recidivism rate is so much lower, the overall societal cost of crime is way less. People get out, they're educated, they get jobs, they pay taxes. They don't go back to crime.
Wow. So the motivational catastrophe doesn't happen because, well, freedom is still better than even a really nice prison.
Precisely. The value of liberty itself is the ultimate deterrent.
You know, all this talk about designing better systems, whether for justice or society or even for fun, reminds me it's a great time to thank our sponsor, Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages Institute is a leading institution for creative media education, offering industry-focused diploma and professional certificate programs in areas like game design, game art, concept art, and more. They're all about providing students with hands-on training, expert instructors, and strong industry connections to prepare them for successful careers. If you're passionate about these industries and looking for a practical, career-oriented education, you should really check them out. Their website is mages.edu.sg.
That's fantastic. I mean, thinking about building a world in a game, it requires so much creativity and a deep understanding of how systems work. It feels very connected to what we're talking about, just in a much more fun context. Definitely visit mages.edu.sg.
I completely agree. The kind of systems thinking and problem solving you learn in game design is incredibly valuable. You're balancing rules, incentives, player psychology. It's a microcosm of designing any complex system. A great skill to have. Listeners should absolutely check them out.
All right. So the quarantine model sounds logical. It seems to work in places like Norway. But Sapolsky says there's a huge problem that could sink the whole thing.
And this is the real core of the chapter's title. The problem is us. The problem is that, proximally, punishing people feels good. It's rewarding.
He cites this incredible study with 6-year-old kids and chimpanzees. A researcher is either nice to them or mean to them. Then, the kid or chimp watches that same researcher get whacked with a stick. And what happens? If the researcher was mean, they will literally pay, kids give up tokens, chimps push a heavy door, to keep watching the punishment. They enjoy it.
So our brains are wired to get a hit of dopamine from seeing someone we think is a bad guy get what's coming to them. That explains so much about the internet.
Exactly. Neuroimaging studies show our reward circuits, the nucleus accumbens, light up when we punish someone who cheated us in a game. It's the same part of the brain that's activated by cocaine or orgasm. We're biologically predisposed to enjoy retribution.
And that joy is why we have these stories of Bundy Qs, celebratory barbecues before Ted Bundy's execution, or the massive cheering crowds for Damien's. It's a public festival. It feels righteous, and it feels good.
So we're just stuck, doomed by our dopamine to be a vengeful species forever?
Well, this is where Sapolsky ends on a surprisingly hopeful note. He says, look at the arc of history. We've done it before. We've changed.
He maps the evolution. We went from frenzied mobs killing lepers, to state-sanctioned public torture like Damien's, to a quick public hanging like Rainey Bethia in 1936, to a private electrocution for Bundy, to a quiet lethal injection for Timothy McVeigh. With each step, the spectacle gets smaller, the bloodlust is tamed, and our collective appetite for visceral revenge is lessened.
And people get used to it. He then brings up the ultimate step. Anders Breivik in Norway, a man who committed one of the worst mass murders in modern history, and he gets 21 years and a PlayStation. And the Norwegian society, for the most part, accepts it. Not for Breivik's sake, but for their sake. To uphold their own values.
But what about the victims? Don't they need that retribution for closure?
Sapolsky points to studies showing that closure is largely a myth. For many families of victims, executions are actually re-traumatizing. He cites a study comparing families in Texas, which has the death penalty, to Minnesota, which doesn't. And the families in Minnesota actually fared significantly better psychologically.
That is completely counterintuitive. Wow. All right, this has been an incredibly deep dive. Let's open up the mailbag and take a few questions from our listeners. First question is from Leo in Toronto. Leo asks, if there's no free will and punishment is just quarantine, what's to stop someone from committing a minor crime knowing the punishment will be minimal? Ethan?
Great question, Leo. It gets at the heart of the deterrence issue. The key is that the quarantine model is forward-looking, not backward-looking. The constraint isn't proportional to the crime you committed, it's proportional to the danger you pose in the future. If a minor crime reveals you're a significant danger, the constraint will reflect that. But more importantly, as the Norway example shows, the loss of liberty itself, even in a, quote, nice facility, is a profound punishment. People value their freedom above almost anything else.
Makes sense. Okay, next up, a question from Chloe in London. She writes, the chapter talks a lot about horrible, violent crimes. How does this no free will and quarantine model apply to nonviolent crimes, like financial fraud or tax evasion? Sarah, what do you think?
That's a really important question, Chloe. The principles are exactly the same. The first question is always, what harm is this person causing? And what is the absolute minimum intervention needed to stop that harm? For a financial fraudster, a physical quarantine probably isn't necessary. The constraint might be barring them from holding corporate office, seizing assets, requiring strict financial oversight, or mandating community service that uses their skills for good. The focus remains on preventing harm and rehabilitating, not on making them pay in a retributive sense.
All right, final question. This one is from Marcus in California. Sapolsky ends by admitting his own struggle with this, wanting to see the face of evil after a white supremacist shot up a synagogue. If he can't fully get on board emotionally, how can the rest of us be expected to?
That, for me, is one of the most powerful parts of the book. His honesty doesn't weaken his argument. It strengthens it. He's not pretending this is easy. He's showing that our intellectual understanding and our deep-seated emotional reactions can be in conflict. The point isn't to flip a switch and feel nothing. The point is to recognize that our gut feelings for revenge are just that, feelings. They aren't a sound basis for a moral or legal system. The journey is about learning to let our more reflective, rational, and humane selves guide our actions, even when our primal instincts are screaming otherwise. It's a struggle, but as he says, it's a struggle we've proven we can win over time.
Brilliantly put. Okay, before we sign off, Sarah, could you try to boil this incredibly dense chapter down to a few key takeaways for us?
I'll do my best. First, our current justice system is based on retribution, which Sapolsky argues is scientifically and morally baseless without free will. Trying to reform it is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Second, a more logical and humane alternative is a public health quarantine model. Protect society by minimally constraining dangerous individuals, while, crucially, addressing the root social causes of their behavior. Third, the biggest obstacle is our own psychology. We are evolved to find punishment intensely rewarding. But, and this is the hopeful part, fourth, our own history shows we can evolve past this. We have steadily tamed our retributive instincts, and we can continue on that path.
Perfect. A fantastic summary of a mind-bending chapter. Sarah, Ethan, thank you both for, as always, making the complex so clear and engaging.
Anytime, James.
My pleasure.
And thank you to all of you for listening. What perplexing topic should we unravel next? Let us know. You can find us on all social media platforms at Penplexity and on our website, penplexity.com. Be sure to follow so you don't miss our next episode. Until then, stay curious. Hello and welcome to Penplexity, the podcast where we get tangled up in the brilliant, baffling, and sometimes bonkers ideas from the world of books. I'm your host, James, and with me today are my two favorite people to get perplexed with. We have the wonderfully sharp Sarah.
Hey everyone, so excited to be here.
And the man who probably calculated the probability of that excitement, the ever-incisive Ethan.
A pleasure, as always, James.
Today, folks, we are diving headfirst into the deep end. We're tackling Chapter 15 of Robert Sapolsky's Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. The chapter is called If You Die Poor, and let me tell you, it does not pull its punches. It starts with toilet etiquette and ends with the meaning of life, or lack thereof. So buckle up.
Oh my gosh, yes. The toilet wiping story! I was reading it and thought, where is he possibly going with this? Two mothers, on different continents, telling their kids the exact same weirdly specific thing. If you wipe back to front, you won't have any friends.
Right? It's so bizarre. What's the point of that, Sarah? Is it a conspiracy by the toilet paper industrial complex?
Laughs. I wish it were that simple. No, Sapolsky uses it to basically throw a pie in the face of meaning. He's saying, look at this weird coincidence. Look at the guy who survived 2 building collapses, or the other guy who survived both atomic bombs. What does it mean? And his answer is, nothing. It just happened. Because of what came before it. There's no grand cosmic reason.
And that's fundamentally unsettling for our brains. We are pattern recognition machines. We're built to find meaning, to connect dots. So when we're presented with pure randomness or a chain of causality that has no inherent purpose, it creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. It's what he calls the terror when shadowed by meaninglessness. It's the sibling to our fear of death.
Terror. That's a strong word, but it fits. He suggests that a lot of philosophy that tries to argue for free will is just people trying to avoid feeling this terror. Trying to convince themselves it's not such a downer.
Exactly. He calls it doing, quote, contortions to make an emotional stance seem like an intellectual one. It's like that quote he uses from The Bishop's Wife, hearing about Darwin's theory. Let us hope it is not true, but if it is, let us pray that it will not become generally known. People are scared of this idea.
And perhaps for good reason, he explores the sadder but wiser hypothesis. The idea that people with clinical depression actually have a more accurate view of their level of control over the world, while the rest of us are walking around with these slightly delusional, optimistic goggles on. And sometimes, the truth isn't helpful. He gives that brutal example of a doctor having to decide whether to tell a burn victim that their whole family died. The truth can be devastating.
Okay, but then there's the other side of the fear, the practical side. Daniel Dennett's, quote, nefarious neurosurgeon story. If we tell everyone, hey, you have no free will, you're not responsible, won't society just collapse? Won't we all just run amok?
That's the big objection, for sure, the running amok challenge. But Sapolsky's comeback is pretty cynical and maybe true. He basically says, look around. We live in a society that preaches free will and responsibility, and our rates of violence are still off the charts. We're already running amok. So he argues that getting rid of free will is unlikely to make things worse, especially if people are educated on why they behave the way they do.
He does concede another downside, though, which I find more compelling. It's not just about crime, it's about malaise. He references Ted Chiang's story about the predictor, a gizmo with a light that flashes 1 second before you press a button. Knowing your choice is already determined hollows people out. They stop eating. They fall into a waking coma. That yawning chasm of pointlessness is a genuine risk.
Right, so it's a total downer, it might make us all criminals, and at best it'll turn us into zombies who won't feed ourselves. So why on earth is Sapolsky arguing we should face this?
Because this is the heart of the whole chapter. This is the big reveal. He says if you feel that malaise, if you're worried that you won't deserve your awards, or that your success will feel empty, it means you're one of the lucky ones. It is an immense privilege to be able to worry about things like that.
Oh, wow. So for the people who aren't so lucky, this science is something else entirely.
It's liberatory. He tells the story of an advocate for people with obesity. She spent her whole life hating herself, thinking she was a fat pig. Then she learned she has a mutation in the leptin gene. Her body physically can't tell her brain that she's full. It wasn't a failure of willpower, it was her biology. And that knowledge freed her from decades of self-loathing. It wasn't her fault.
And that is the crux of it. He applies this logic across the board. ADHD, autism, depression, poverty, even just not being conventionally attractive. We blame people, and people blame themselves, for outcomes that are the result of a million biological and environmental factors they had absolutely no control over. Like John Henryism, the pathogenic belief that you can overcome systemic racism through sheer effort, which literally increases your risk of heart disease. It's a fatal belief in controlling the uncontrollable.
It's about dismantling blame. That's a powerful way to look at it. You know, this whole idea of the things that shape us, the tools and environments that determine our path, it actually makes me think of our sponsor for this episode. This episode of Penplexity is brought to you by Mages Institute in Singapore. Mages is a leading institution for creative media education, offering industry-focused diploma and professional certificate programs in areas like game design, game art, concept art, and more. They're committed to providing students with hands-on training, expert instructors, and strong industry connections. And it feels connected because, while Sapolsky might argue our passion for something like game design is predetermined, a place like Mages provides the crucial environmental input. It provides the skills, the causal chain, if you will, that allows someone to take that passion and turn it into a successful, fulfilling career.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a liberatory path in its own way. If you have this biological proclivity, this love for art or games, getting the right education is the butterfly effect that can completely change your life's trajectory. If that sounds like you should absolutely check them out.
I agree. Education is one of the most powerful environmental variables we can be exposed to. It literally reshapes the brain. So if you want to break into or advance in these creative industries, visit mages.edu.sg. That's mages.edu.s-g. Go learn more.
All right, let's switch gears slightly and take a few questions from our listeners. The first one is from Alex, who asks, if there's no free will, what's the point of trying to change or improve yourself? Ethan, that seems up your alley.
It's the ultimate question, really. Sapolsky's answer would be that the trying itself is determined. The drive to improve, the biological capacity for self-discipline, the environment that encourages it, it's all part of the same causal web. You don't try to improve despite determinism. You try to improve because of determinism. The point isn't to stop trying. It's to stop blaming the people for whom the variables just didn't line up, to allow for that trying to be successful.
A very different perspective. Okay, next question is from Maria. Does this mean we shouldn't hold criminals accountable, Sarah?
This is a big one. It doesn't mean we let dangerous people roam free. But it changes the reason for our response. Think about it like quarantining someone with a contagious, deadly virus. You don't do it because you blame them for getting sick. You don't think they deserve to be isolated. You do it for the pragmatic reason of protecting society. So we'd move from a system of moralistic retribution to one focused on, well, public health and safety.
Fascinating. Okay, last question is from Ben. He says, this all feels very negative. Is there any positive takeaway here?
Oh, 100%. The positive takeaway is immense. It's freedom. Freedom from hating other people for things they ultimately didn't choose. As Sapolsky says, hating someone for their actions becomes as absurd as hating the sky for storming. And maybe even more importantly, it's freedom from hating yourself for your own perceived failings. The positive takeaway is radical, world-changing empathy.
What a chapter. Just incredible. Sarah, could you try and distill all of that into a few key takeaways for us?
I'll try. First, our deep-seated need to find meaning and purpose in life's events is just a feature of our brains, not a feature of the universe. The universe itself is indifferent. Second, letting go of free will can feel terrifying if you're one of life's lucky ones, but for those who are unfairly blamed for their circumstances, whether it's poverty, addiction, or mental illness, it is profoundly liberating. And third, the ultimate conclusion is that no one deserves their good or bad fortune. This should tear down our systems of praise and blame and build a new foundation of compassion.
Less blame, more compassion. I can't think of a better way to end it. A massive thank you to my brilliant guests, Sarah and Ethan, for helping us unravel that.
Anytime, James.
Loved it.
And thank you for listening. What book or big idea should we get perplexed by next? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials at Penplexity or visit our website at penplexity.com. Until next time, keep questioning.